Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy. We have reached the 17th installment in our James Bond Retrospective series with 1995's Goldeneye, directed by Martin Campbell and starring the one and only Pierce Brosnan. We have finally officially entered the Brosnan era. I can already see George smiling. He's been waiting for this for many, many weeks now, since we began this whole goddamn thing. Last week we did License to Kill, On Farewell to Timothy Dalton, and 2 Bond films, and now we're moving on to Brosnan. We've got 4 films, and which I'm very excited to get into, because the next 3 I still haven't seen, and that will conclude all the Bond films that I still currently haven't seen. But we're here today to talk about Goldeneye. I think this is one of the big ones. We talk about the elite Bond films. I think this is absolutely one of them, not to give too much away before we go into our main discussion. And as always, guys, you know, if you've been following us for week to week, this is completely spoiler-filled. We're going to be talking everything about this thing. Villains, Bond girls, music, everything in between. There's a lot of interesting behind the scenes with this one as well. And joining us again from last week, we have Scott, and I think we have Scott. Scott and Cam from SpyHards podcast. Great to have you guys back on. And coincidentally, and we didn't plan this was just happy coincidence, the timing of you on this review, specifically for Goldeneye, kind of ties into your guys' channel as well. Really happy coincidence if you guys want to talk about that.
Well, you know, you talk about big, right? A very important day. This is our 1-year anniversary. Our first episode was Goldeneye, and we're joining you today on that anniversary to talk about Goldeneye. So I thought, let's go big. Hey, everyone.
Better than I ever could have dreamed.
Yeah. It's the head through that sold it. I was expecting the Roger Moore karate chop.
That was a one take as well. You did it in one, man. That's awesome.
I drank a lot of Perrier for this gag.
You're going to have to take a lot of breaks throughout this recording.
Let's go.
Oh, man. It's not that kind of Bond film, is it? I think we've been drinking this heavily for Die Another Day, maybe. I don't know about this one.
We're not sponsored by them. I probably should take this down.
No.
Sorry,
well,
Perrier.
if they want to sponsor SpyHards, we can send this to them, and let's find out what can go on there. Because
give us a call.
We never know.
Drink along. This could be our first Bond retrospective drink along. It's a happy occasion. We're talking about Goldeneye. Why not?
Definitely. Yeah, let's quickly bring in the social, because as you said, it's your guys' 1-year anniversary today, which is incredible. That, as we said, massive coincidence. We're going to get into a little bit of that shortly, because we know you've got a lot of things on. We can let you speak about that as well, because it's, you're not, of course, you've got your big review and interviews, which we'll let you guys talk about. But before we hand over to you, let's quickly bring up our socials, where you can find us. Cinema Savvy on Facebook, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, letterboxd.com/Cinema Savvy, and of course we have a link to our TeePublic store in that description below. And SpyHards, where people can find you. We have details in the description. As you said, this is live, and we also have some details here as well. But if you want to let people know how you're celebrating your 1-year anniversary, what videos you've got already up this week and coming out.
Sure. So, I mean, this week we're celebrating by going back to 1998, just 3 years after Goldeneye, to talk about the Avengers. And not that Avengers, the Ralph Fiennes, Uma Thurman Adventures. And that's out today, actually, so you can check that out. But we have a couple of extra bonus episodes around the film. Cam?
Yeah, we're going to have an interview with Jeremiah Chechik, who directed the film, coming out this week, as well as an interview with Don McPherson, who wrote it. So if you've ever watched this movie and wondered, like, what is this? How did it wind up like this? Because it is pretty notoriously a box office disaster, critically savaged. A lot of, Avengers fans were pretty angry about it and would watch the movie and be like, this is incomprehensible. How did this happen? Well, I mean, Jeremiah Chechik is going to sit down and basically tell us on a studio level how this happened, because there was a lot of mangling going on behind the scenes. And then Don McPherson is going to join us and talk about the evolution of the story, because I think anyone who's into the Avengers is going to want to tune in for that Don McPherson interview, because he talks about what the initial idea of the story was. It was completely different than anything in the movie. Scenes that feel like bizarre non sequiturs in the movie, like, say, the teddy bears at the table. Moments like that are going to be explained and make coherent sense by the end of that interview. He actually will explain how a lot of things changed throughout the evolution of that script. A lot.
That's awesome. I still haven't seen that film. So you've mentioned teddy bears at a table now. I'm kind of weirdly intrigued by this movie. So maybe that's one that I'll have to dip into after this. But yeah, so like should we talk about Goldeneye a little bit? First time watching this, because this is how we usually start these things, and we've all probably got different stories about our first time watching this, if you can even remember it. And I think specifically with this one, I don't know how old all of us guys are, but sort of growing up in the 90s, video games being what they are, I know that's definitely going to be a conversation topic at some point in this review, is going to be the prolific video game that tied in with this film. I think this one's probably nostalgic to a lot of people. I don't fall into that camp, unfortunately, but I did have an incredibly unforgettable time first time watching this film. So I'm sorry, Cam, this is you're going to have your first time story, but this is where unfortunately you're going to be left out of this conversation just a little bit. So Prince Charles Cinema in London, it was almost like a Bond pilgrimage. It was like, it's almost 2 weeks ago now, I think it was, we went. And Scott, we met you there, and we also met Tom Butler as well from A to Z James Bond podcast. So it was really cool to meet all you guys in person. And yeah, it was like a pilgrimage. Like everyone was there for Goldeneye. I don't know how many people were going there that hadn't seen the film before. It seemed like a lot of people were going because they had fond memories with it. And me and you, George, you drove us down to London. And we listened to all the Bond themes in a playlist. It was incredible. We were going to save it for No Time to Die, but we couldn't resist. We were going to see a Bond film. It was going to happen. And yeah, I got to see it on the big screen for the first time, which is incredible. A lot of these I've been watching on the small screen. And, seeing it on the big screen, it really, watching it on the small screen doesn't do it justice. You have to see these films on the big screen. So I'm so happy that I got to see Goldeneye. My first time was in a cinema, not back in 1995. I'd have been a pup. I'd have been like 2 years old, probably not old enough to go and see Goldeneye. But no, it was great. So that was my first time watching the film. How about you, George? Can you remember when you first saw this thing?
I can't. I mean, sorry guys, this is the final Bond film that came out before I was born, so at least I can start saying that from the next ones. But I don't know the first time I saw this film, because, we'll talk about way more and Was Not Enough, but obviously the Brosnan was very much the era. Was Not Enough and Dying of a Day, the two I vividly remember. That's the time you sort of getting into the Bond films. And Goldeneye, I had a very good friend growing. When you have a best mate, but it's your parents' best mate's kids, right? They had an N64 and we had a PS1. So a lot of my memories were actually the N64 game, specifically the multiplayer with Oddjob and the Golden Gun mode. Obviously, everyone knows Facility, which was obviously the place to be. That generation's one-on-one no-scoping as it used to be back in COD. But my memories of this film was finding out one day that it wasn't just a game, it was a film as well. So it would have been at some point after Casino Royale, I think, I saw Goldeneye properly for the first time. I still think I was a bit too young, because I was like, oh, that's Jean Grey. I don't really know what's going on here. And obviously you get older and realize, wow, okay. So it's one of them where my first memory is hazy of it. But I'd say the last 10 years, this is probably the Bond film I've seen most with Casino. We're not doing our rankings yet, but if this isn't in the top 2, then I need to be checked out at a hospital, because it's just unbelievable. But yeah, I don't. But what I will say, that cinema trip, Prince Charles, that was the first film I booked during lockdown 3 at this point. I know there's so many lockdowns here now, but that's the one. I think April the tickets came out, and I was like, I'm finally going to watch Goldeneye at a cinema, and I was so excited because I've only seen Dying of a Day onwards at the cinema. I've never seen some of the older ones, so I was really, really excited to see that, and it was incredible on the big screen. Honestly, that has meant quite a lot, I think, to be able to see that for the first time.
I was a bit sort of arse backwards with this one. I played the game a lot more before than I ever saw the film. It was N64 was around in the house. I played it a lot with my brothers. I've got 4 brothers, so you can imagine there was a lot of shouting and fighting. And then we got to play in the game, and there was even more shouting and fighting. And I think we got it on VHS probably around the time Tomorrow Never Dies came out, sort of 98 window. I don't know when the game came out, 97, I think, off the top of my head. And I know it was a bit later than the game than the film because of just delays. But yeah, so I saw it on VHS. So seeing it on the big screen with you guys actually was the first time I ever saw it on the big screen. And I'm glad I had that opportunity because it really added to my experience.
Well, for me, I guess I'm the oldest one here. Time is the fire in which I'm burning. So I saw this film in theaters in 95, and I remember the excitement building up to it. I had watched all the other films beforehand. I'd become very obsessed with that franchise since I was about 10 or 11 years old. And I remember reading a lot of magazine coverage leading into Goldeneye. a lot of like, I remember Entertainment Weekly here was putting out a special on ranking all the Bond movies, and an interview with Pierce Brosnan doing the best and worst of the franchise. So like I was so primed, and I remember seeing it and really enjoying it, but also having that thing that a lot of, I think, fans do, where you sit down, you watch the latest installment in a very beloved series, and you're like, I like this, but I don't know where it stands yet. I haven't wrapped my head around what Pierce Brosnan is, what he's bringing. It's going to take me a little bit of time. So, like, by the time Tomorrow Never Dies rolled around, I was fully on board with Brosnan. But it was that initial, time with him. I was like, who is this guy? I don't know about this guy yet. So it was a movie I very much enjoyed. And I remember buying it on VHS. And I remember my VHS was defective and had, like, the very top of the screen was blurry. So it was like this blur at the top of people's heads. It drove me crazy. And I had that VHS for like many, many years. But it's one I've watched a lot. And ultimately, I can say when all was said and done with the Brosnan era, it ranked at the top for me.
Mm-hmm. For me, obviously, because it's the only one I've currently seen of the Brosnans, I think for every new Bond actor, it's always that kind of introductory period where as a viewer, you kind of got to get used to them. And I was conscious of that watching this film. Like, I think Brosnan's great. We'll talk about Brosnan in its whole section because we absolutely have to. Because even the story of getting him to play the character is very interesting. I know we're going to be bringing up a certain TV commercial, which is a lot of good fun. But I was watching the film with that in mind, especially coming hot off the heels of Dalton as well. And, it hasn't taken me 6 years to get to this film because there was a 6-year hiatus with this film. You can read all about it. It's kind of all over my head. There's a lot of studios. There's a lot of film rights. There's a lot of selling and negotiating and bickering and behind the scenes stuff. It's absolutely mad. It is on Wikipedia. You can probably find articles on the internet that go into it a lot more. Suffice it to say, there was problems with the production and sort of like the Bond rights at the time and the studios. And within that 6-year period, Dalton probably quite rightly was like, I'm done, because he had a 3-picture deal at that time. But if a studio's taken 6 years to get something off the ground, I don't know how old Dalton was at that time. By the time he'd wrapped on License to Kill, I'm not sure how old he was. But 6 years later and everything's just in, film purgatory. I can understand him taking a step back from it. Once they'd got everything sorted, I think he did come around to maybe coming back to play one more role. There's kind of conflicting information in there as to why he left. He was done with the 6 years, but then there was also a claim that he was interested in returning, but just for one more Bond film to fulfill his contract. I think his contract actually expired in 1990, I think, if I remember rightly. And, when the film producers were all ready to go, raring to go with more Bond films, they said, well, no, we want you on a multi-picture contract, at least 4 or 5 more Bond films. He was like, no, I'm done. And I can kind of understand that. If you've had 6 years away and you want to come back with a brand new Bond, ready to go, you do want someone that's going to stick around. You don't want to come back with one more film from the previous incarnation and then reboot it, essentially. So I can understand both sides. It's a shame we never got that third film. And actually, there is information as to what that third film would have been, which was interesting. I didn't know this even surfaced, how far into production they got, but apparently, I'm going to go through this really quickly. Production was set to start in 1990 in Hong Kong. I think that was actually talked about right from License to Kill. They wanted to film in Hong Kong, if I remember. They were looking for a 91 release date. It would have featured a terrorist attack on a British nuclear facility in Scotland, threatening to cause World War III. Of course, it's going to threaten to cause World War III. It's a Bond film. Bond traveling to East Asia to investigate corrupt businessman Sir Henry Lee Ching, along with jewel thief Connie Webb, and Bond fighting his former mentor, Denham Crisp. And I think they took elements for that. I think early concepts for Goldeneye were that Bond, it's the Sean Bean character, was going to be his mentor. He was going to be a lot older than Bond. Eventually became sort of his peer, 006, as opposed to someone who was above him. And I think actually in terms of casting for the villain, they were looking at, I did see the name Alan Rickman there, and there was someone else as well who I'm forgetting right now, but
Anthony Hopkins was rumored as well.
That's it. Yeah. That would have been very interesting, but I mean, we already got Hans Gruber in Die Hard, and can Alan Rickman top a villain performance as he did in that? Maybe not, but very interesting backstory to this film and how it all came about.
Yeah, the reason I kept laughing then is because you kind of mentioned who wants a 6-year gap to come back with the last Bond performance. Well, guys, we're still waiting for No Time to Die.
That's true. Yeah.
I really want to quickly bring up your guys' Goldeneye review because I listened to it the weekend and it just hit me really hard. And it's that really sad, looking back a year later type thing. It's like, well, I think one of you says, No Time to Die is due out in November. And luckily one of you jumps in and is like, let's not get too hesitant. I'm just sat there saying, we're still waiting. It's been a whole year. We're still waiting. So it's insane. I'm trying to read up on all the course. I'm just going to plug A to Z and say I cannot wait for them to cover Goldeneye. So those guys have researched it fully. So I will have probably a biographical understanding of what happened. But it seems a bit messy. And, at least we can laugh and joke about No Time to Die. But at least we can say that of like those 6 delays, 4 of them have been because of coronavirus, which is a lot easier to summarize in 20 years' time than obviously what we've had to do for this one. But it's a really interesting one. But I'm firmly in a camp, and I really enjoy Dalton. I'm not being sort of Brosnan biased, but I think the time away probably helped the franchise. It gave them a course correction. At that point, you've got Cubby Broccoli, who's sort of slowly passing everything over to Barbara and Michael G. Wilson, and this is very much the I don't want to say beginning of their reign because that sounds really sort of evil, but this is essentially the first Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson film. I think Cubby took on like a sort of advisor role, did a lot of behind the scenes stuff. So it's a very interesting read about the production, but I think the time helped. Obviously, we weren't around in '89. I don't think any of us would have probably known the status of box offices and things like that anyway. So, when you look at License to Kill adjusted for inflation, it's the lowest Bond film. Audiences at the time, I think you guys also mentioned, we spoke in License to Kill as well, that other big films were coming out. I think it was at a bit of time away from Bond, coming back with a new cast, a new Bond, new MI6, which we'll get to. All that kind of stuff was the perfect, and contextually as well. Being the mid-90s probably helped in terms of that time gap of the leaping technologies people were having, which we'll get to because we've got to talk about some 90s hacking, haven't we, all throughout today's video. So, it's an interesting one. I'm sure someone's probably written a book, and I kind of want to read it because it's just fascinating the more I've read about this sort of 6-year gap.
Well, I mean, speaking of, I did briefly mention it last week at License to Kill, but there's a guy called Mark Edlitz who wrote a book called The Lost Adventures of James Bond. And he's basically filled in the blank between End of License to Kill and Goldeneye and really explained the stories that were going to come and kind of how and why it fell apart. I would recommend that book to any passionate James Bond fan. Check that out. But, in terms of coming to here, I think the term absence makes the heart grow fonder is probably quite applicable because it allowed people to breathe and miss the Bond films. I always think of like the difference between, say, Star Trek Nemesis in 2004 to Star Trek 2009 in 2009. There's a 5-year gap, and 5 years. And people were bored of Star Trek. And by the time 2009 came along, they're like, yes, I'm ready to go again. And it was a smash hit.
Yeah, I think the only sad part of it is that Dalton didn't get his third, because I think when we look at that sort of era, it feels like a little bit of a blip. It's 2 movies in like 87 and 89, whereas I think if he'd at least gotten a third, you'd be able to say, okay, that's kind of the Dalton era. Here, not the case, but I do think they needed those. I don't think they understood what Bond was yet. Like, it seemed like when they were doing License to Kill, they were trying to push it into this 80s action territory, and we talked about that movie and how much we enjoy it. But audiences did not dig it, and it feels like they took those 6 years to not only deal with their legal wranglings, but also to settle down on what Bond should be for the 90s onwards.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the box office speaks for itself with this film. I think it grossed over $350 million, which is, considerably better than the previous 2. And I think reviews at the time, they probably eased up a little bit now. And I think Dalton's probably found more appreciation that he did at the time. People were saying that, Brosnan was a marked improvement as the character of James Bond. And not just that, but in that 6-year gap, so much was happening in the world as well. Over the course of many of the Bond reviews that we've talked about events that were going on in the real world and how they kind of extrapolated a lot of those political elements and placed them within the James Bond films. I mean, so many, and quite rightly so, dealt with the Cold War, right? And I think basically all of that was pretty much over by the time this film rolled around. And I think some people were questioning whether Bond was even relevant anymore. How can you update it? It's almost like Judi Dench's line in the film where she says, "You're a misogynistic dinosaur," or I can't remember the exact quote that she says. But I think that's pretty much what people were asking themselves, is how can we revitalize this Bond? And, it makes sense that Martin Campbell directing this one would also kind of do the same for Casino Royale as well, in that he was able to update it for a completely different generation, different film audience and everything, especially the mid-90s. a little film called Jurassic Park came out in 93. Special effects were a big thing, and I think this was the first one to utilize special effects within a James Bond film. You see that all over the title credit sequence. And speaking of that opening title sequence with the theme playing, you had there was the dissolution of the Soviet Union at the time. I think you'd had the fall of the Berlin Wall as well. So you had loads of things, the end of the Cold War, huge pivotal things happening in the world. And I think this film kind of effectively utilized that and sort of had that as the forefront, has that as the opening curtain, essentially, of this film. Even down to the fact you've got bikini-clad women with sledgehammers breaking down the hammer and the sickle, which is, can you get more on the nose in terms of a visual representation than that? But it definitely feels, I mean, this is stupid to say, of course it does. It feels very 90s, especially by 2021 standards. It feels incredibly 90s. And that's not a bad thing. Like License to Kill feels very 80s. It's very of its time. But I do think, I mean, I would have loved to have seen a third Dalton film. You guys know that, talking about the Dalton films and everything. I loved his take on the character. And I agree with you, Cam, in that 2 films, you can't really call it an era. I think it's the OCD in me as well. I want a trilogy. Trilogy is like a complete beginning, middle, and end of a story. And I would have loved a third one, but 6 years, I think it was the right time for a reboot. And I think as reboots go, it's kind of like a soft reboot, a new take on the character. They handled it perfectly, because it feels very much akin to, I'd say, like the action, more so of like the early Sean Connery ones, like the rough and ready kind of Bond, but with the charm and the quippiness of a Roger Moore. And that's kind of how I'd equate Brosnan, I think, at this point.
Yeah, it's a really big one. You mentioned about Martin Campbell. I'm going to jump on something from last night. I don't know if you guys below have seen this as well. So he did an Ask Me Anything on Reddit. He's promoting his new film, Approach Day. And, as somebody was going to ask, would you come back for another Bond film with a new Bond? And he kind of made it, passing comment like, yeah, I'd love to. And obviously that's caused a storm on James Bond Twitter today. I want to kind of really pose to you guys, would anyone want to see Martin Campbell come back for a third film? I'm going to jump in first and say the romantic in me would love a man that made a trilogy of Bond films and each one was a different Bond kickstarting it. But at the same time, I don't want to see him come back. I think we need just something completely fresh for a new era with sort of no attachment to previous Bond films. So I just want to pose that. I know we've all seen Casino Royale and Goldeneye now, so I'm luckily not spoiling anything for Chris.
It's a kind of a tough one because I agree with that romantic idea of having his trilogy. I like that, but it's a romantic idea. I mean, where I'd like to see the Bond franchise go, which we won't get into, I think it needs a new person at the helm. So I would just go with a new young director and mix things up.
Yeah, I mean, like Martin Campbell will be pushing 80, probably into his 80s by the time they would even be probably directing the next Bond film. Who knows when No Time to Die comes out at this point, so it's going to be a while. But I wonder, though, just looking at Eon, they've hired like Fukunaga to do No Time to Die. They did Sam Mendes for Spectre and Skyfall. It seems like they're more interested in more of these auteur directors right now. So, like, we know there's been these flirtations with Chris Nolan over the years. I'm almost wondering if they're going to want to bring him in to do some sort of, like, 3-film series or something. Like, I'm just wondering if they start looking at it more as, like, going with that. Because a lot of studios are just grabbing any director, right? Like, it's like if you've done a TV show, if you've done one movie that was successful, grab them, throw them on a Marvel movie or a DC movie. I'm wondering if Eon might try and go a different direction, which is grab some of these really like auteur type directors and get them to bring their vision, which has worked really well for them in the last handful.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to be this guy, but I'm going to be this guy. I'm going to compare it to sort of like the current state of the Mission Impossible films, which to me have kind of, there's been a shift. I always keep saying that where Bond, I still enjoy Bond, and going back through the Craig films, I am going to give them another fair shake, especially going through them in sequence. And I'm still very much looking forward to No Time to Die. But for me, the big, what are they going to do next? What's going to be the next stunt? And all those kind of things that you usually attach to a Bond film have kind of shifted to the Mission Impossible series for me now. And speaking of that, the last few at least have had the same director, haven't they? Who's sort of like making his, I think it'd be 4 films by the end of it, won't it? I think he did 5 Fallout, and then he's doing the 2 new ones, isn't it? Yeah, so it'll be 4 films in total. So I think they're going to want, to lock a new Bond actor down for X amount of films, but a considerable amount. I think probably 4 or 5 films at least a trilogy, at bare minimum a trilogy. And I think they're going to want to do the same with a director as well. I mean, we are going to have a video coming out in a couple of months' time talking about who we think could be directing and who could be the next Bond. But I think I want a new take. I want a completely new take. And I think that's kind of what you need. And the Bond franchise kind of does go through ebb and flows, doesn't it? Usually it gets to the point of almost parody or so bad it's good. Can't wait to get to Die Another Day in a few weeks' time. And then when it hits that point, it's like, right, we need a fresh coat of paint on this thing. We need, whether it's a new director, new screenwriter, new actor, usually. And I think that's what it needs. But I'm worried about a Nolan. I don't want to talk about too much about like the hypotheticals of where it could go, but with a Nolan, I'm worried that tonally it would be very similar to the last few Bond films we've had, the very kind of desaturated, realistic, kind of dour kind of feel of Bond. And I think it needs to move into a more, not necessarily farcical way, but kind of what this film did, where it felt more of like a back to basics approach, and it's just an entertaining, fun movie to watch. And the key word fun, I think that's what we need for the next Bond film. But yeah, that's sort of talking about current Bond. But I mean, that's what this film did. You know, it was kind of, it did feel like old school Bond in very many ways. It's got, you know, all the qualities, all the ingredients that you need that you had in like the classic Bond films. It was ridiculous in many aspects. I mean, we've got a space weapon again. I was kind of going through the tick box as I was watching this film for the first time. I was like, oh, it's one of these kind of Bond films. Okay, we've got the giant Death Star laser thing in this film. You've got the ridiculous villainous henchman, which is fantastic. And oh boy, when we get to that section. And it's just got great action. So it's got all the elements that you need, but it's revitalized for that current time of cinema, which was the mid-90s.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect way to get into it as well with the pre-credit scene. It's so hard not to call it facility. It's a chemical factory, I know. But you mentioned, Chris, what you said then about the need something new. I think let's kick off with the stunt, shall we? The bungee jump on the dam. If you're going to... Everyone talks about what's the best entrance for Bond. You know, I don't think you can look past Connery at the poker table, James Bond. I think that's so iconic in its own right. I don't think anyone can come close to Brosnan after. In terms of here's us doing a new Bond, a new era, a new everything. Let's kick off with one of the best stunts ever done. And that is an incredible opening sequence to sort of get you started, to get you into it. And if you look at the first 10, 15 minutes, every line from Brosnan is pretty much a one-liner. So I think it's starting to... You're certainly going to figure out, okay, this Bond's definitely heading in this direction more so than that one. And as far as opening sequences go, I think this is up there. I don't think it's my favorite yet. I know it's sort of jumping in as a sort of overall, but what this one does, it expertly sets up the story comparison, because obviously, you know, Alec Trevelyan is very much a shadow until the villain reveal, but in terms of actual story, it works so well that the time jump as well of, is it 9 years they say as well before the ultimate pre-credit sequence. So I absolutely love this. It does get a bit silly. I think we spoke after the cinema where the one thing this missed was the Bond theme as the plane goes up. And I think a lot of people tend to say that. And I just think that if you're going to sort of set yourself in for a ride for a good 2 hours, that's the way to go out and do it.
I don't know what the exact amount of time is, but you've only got, say, 30 seconds to make a good impression. So you've got people turning up to the cinema to see this new Bond, and you're like, right, impress me, because I didn't like License to Kill. And so they hit you with it. They hit you with this fantastic opener, and they give you a 006, which you haven't really seen many 00s at this point. And then he gets killed, apparently. And it's just straight on action. It is like full on gas. We're going for it. Puns, action is what you want. And I think it sells the rest of the film.
It's also borrowing an element that actually worked really well in License to Kill, which is include a lot of your story elements in the opening sequence, where we have the fantastic stunts. You know, the bungee jump is incredible and has gone on to become iconic. The dive for the plane, maybe a little less so, but it's still a lot of fun. But by working in all this stuff with 006, it's also setting up your story to come the way they did with Sanchez at the start of License to Kill. So I think that's a really effective way of doing it. Also, it's brief, but the idea of getting to see two 00 agents working side by side doing a cool mission is so much fun. And Trevelyan is the first convincing 00 agent other than Bond we've gotten in these movies. I'm sure, you know, the clown from Octopussy was, I'm sure he was amazing when he wasn't in his clown outfit. But I mean, like, getting to see Trevelyan actually shooting down guys and having all of his, you know, awesome style here, you totally buy that Sean Bean could have been cast as Bond just as easily. And I think that's really going to be important to the overall arc of that character. So to me, this is up there with some of the most effective openings to a Bond film ever, for sure.
Yeah, and I loved seeing them working together in that, albeit a very short, opening sequence. I kind of would have loved a film like seeing the two together in actually like a spin-off or something. I know they would never have done that, and maybe they shouldn't do that, but I just loved seeing the two working together in that intro. And I mean, the bungee jump scene on the Contra Dam speaks for itself. I mean, I hadn't seen the film, and I was already aware of the bungee jump scene, and that shot. I think that I'm just checking here. Yeah, it's performed by Wayne Michaels, who did the stunt. 720 feet, bloody hell! I mean, I'd love to do this bungee jump at some point in my life. I mean, if you're going to do one and done with a bungee jump, I mean, it's got to be this, right? I mean, there's nothing else you could do. This would be like the pinnacle of bungee jumps. It's amazing, and and I love the coverage of the dam as well. I love how it reminded me of the Star Destroyer from the opening Star Wars film, how it just keeps going on, and this camera's just slowly panning up, and there's no top. It just keeps going and keeps going. So especially seeing it on the big screen too, I don't think that would have had the same impact watching it on a smaller screen. So tremendous opening scene. And George, I mean, I was talking about, because I always make notes on the Bond films, and I mean, I have to actually scroll on my iPhone this time. There's that many one-liners in this thing and notes that I have on this thing. I was going to take notes in the cinema, but I thought, no, I just want to take it in. But within the first 20
You were
minutes,
that guy I was throwing the popcorn at for making the notes. I knew it.
Yes, it was me. It was me, Austin. It was me all along. 20 minutes in, I was like, "My God, I've lost count of the amount of one-liners in this thing." And it was like, "Okay, we got
to be a rough road for you going forward."
Yes, yeah, I'm ready for it. Bring it on. And it's cartoony in some moments as well. The bit where he's got the canisters on like the trolley, and it's like that Family Guy humor where it just keeps going, and he's wheeling it, and it's a little bit ridiculous, and it's completely tongue-in-cheek, but they fully established pretty early on the tone of what this new Bond's going to be, even down to his opening goddamn line, right, where he's in the toilet and the guy moves the newspaper out of the way. It's great. I think I don't know if it's it's probably one of my favorite opening sequences. It's difficult to say that because I haven't seen them all, and I'm going to have to remind myself of some of them. But yeah, it just covers so much, doesn't it, in that opening sequence of the film.
Yeah, I mean, now's a great time to talk about Brosnan, actually, as we're on to the great man himself. What we really want to quickly say, credit scenes as well. I know, obviously, you've not seen it, but I think on paper, the Brosnan pre-credit sequences are unmatched. I think they knew exactly what they wanted to do with them. And there's only 4, so fair to compare it to, 7 or 6 or whatnot. Some of them obviously have 2, but there's just always been something about his ones where I think they knew exactly what they wanted. And, I love the Casino Royale one. It's more drama than action. Obviously, Quantum's got the follow-up car chase, and a lot of people have differing thoughts. We'll get to that. Skyfall has a good one. I adore the Spectre one until the song plays. And yeah, I love the credits to me. And I think, something as a kid, it's kind of what we're saying, that if you want to get in the mood for a film, it's the first couple of minutes that grab you. And the Bond films always had that from such an early age. Again, World's Not Enough's going to be a really big one for me personally to talk about. So we're 2 weeks away from that. I'm very excited. But yeah, it's a really good one. But talking about Brosnan, I didn't even know how to really get into it. Let's not do the whole story of Remington Steele again, because I know we did that sort of at Living Daylights. But one thing we didn't mention Living Daylights was the incredible Diet Coke commercial adverts. Are you guys below familiar with those or heard about them at all?
Oh,
I've not seen them.
It's ringing a bell.
Okay, 1986, wasn't it? I think
86 and 88. I think there are 2. There might be more, but essentially, the backstory of Remington Steele was that he always wanted. He was always the bookie's favourite to do Bond, and obviously what happened with Living Daylights and it being cancelled. In the time away from it, when he wasn't Bond, he did a couple of Diet Coke adverts, and he obviously Remington Steele is sort of spirated a bit of a spoof type thing, but he's basically James Bond. It feels like, here's my audition to be James Bond via Diet Coke. And you look at them 30, 40 years later, as we almost are now, and it's like, he did become James Bond, but he is James Bond in those adverts. And it's such a great way to market Diet Coke. Now, I sit here with a Pepsi Max can, so I can't really say I'm on Scott's level at all anyway. But it's just one of those where I think when it got to it, I've never... Because in my lifetime we've had one recasting of Bond, and I wasn't an age to understand film, the next one's going to be massive because I'd have seen the names that have gone back. We know it's not going to be Idris Elba, but that name's been there since like 2010, 2011, and it's going to be really exciting to experience a new Bond announcement. But it must have been incredible for him to get that second chance that not many people get, where they can bring him back in. And sort of really quick going back to the Dalton stuff, I've always wondered if, I know they wanted him to do a third one and whatnot, but I wonder if deep down their plan was always Pierce Brosnan. They might have known Dalton wouldn't come back, and I just think he was almost like sort of waiting in the wings, and it just happened. He arrived.
I mean, firstly, I really want to see these adverts. I was hoping it was more like the Diet Coke adverts where the guy's topless and the can rolls over and he picks it up and he's in the jeans, because any chance to see Brosnan's love rug, I am there. But that aside, I sometimes like to think that Dalton was a bit of a second place, which is a shame to say because I really like his films. But a part of me always just really wanted to have seen Brosnan in The Living Daylights and License to Kill. They would have been slightly different films, I imagine, but we've ended up in this reality. I'm sure there's opposite realities where Brosnan did them all, and I'm happy with what we got, but I do often wonder what it would have been like if he had got that role from the start.
I wonder, though, if he'd been too young, if he'd been cast. I mean, I guess it's only a small handful of years, but I wonder if there's a little bit of the maturity, because by the time he does Goldeneye, he's in his late 30s. I tend to think that's a good sweet spot for Bond actors. Like, I remember they wanted Dalton when he was like 28 or something like that back in the day. And I think that was too early as well. So like in terms of the performance, I think Brosnan could have done it, but I like seeing him here where he has that kind of a little bit of a weathered look. Like he looks like a guy who's been around for a while. We buy him opposite Sean Bean as two guys who have gone on a fair amount of missions. I'm more than happy with the Dalton blip, which I very much treasure. I'm okay with that. So the fact is we walked away with 4 Brosnan films, and that's great. We had a Brosnan era, and I think he did what he could. And I think one thing that Brosnan really brought is, because that's one thing we always ask with a Bond actor, what did they bring to it? Dalton's like the intense Bond. Roger Moore's the comedic one. And I think what Brosnan brings is like a real level of sensitivity and more emotional stakes to his Bond that we haven't seen. And maybe that's a little bit of a 90s thing of we have to make the more sensitive male action hero, which was kind of a trend at the time. We see, Scott and I are both Star Trek fans. That was very much an element of Jean-Luc Picard for Star Trek in that era as well. So I think that was a certain element of who his Bond was, and he's perfectly suited to that. But they also, look, you put Brosnan in a tux, you got James Bond. And This is a movie that seems interested in basically reaffirming the iconography of Bond, because he's in a tux at a casino ordering, martinis in no time. But at the same time, it wants to interrogate who this character is in 1995, which we get through the M character. And several figures throughout the movie question who Bond is and does he belong in this world. So Brosnan is someone you can throw in that tux and you instantly buy him as Bond. That's important because I think you need to do that. You couldn't throw someone who's a little off center. Like the thing is, Dalton's a little off center. He's a little intense. He's got a little bit of a mad glint in his eye. Mm-hmm. You can't have that if you kind of want the classic look of Bond and then to question who the classic Bond is in 1995.
Yeah, I think you mentioned like the sensitivity with Pierce Brosnan, and actually that was probably one of the weirdest scenes in this film for me. You know exactly which one I'm talking about. It's the one where he's sat on the beach and it's like a scene from The Karate Kid and he's looking wistfully out at the horizon in the sea. It's just so out of place, and I don't know if that was like enhancements of digital effects. That did not look like natural lighting. That was like a nuclear bomb had gone off on the horizon or something. I don't know what was going on with that. It's like the intro of Lion King, this blinding red sky. So weird. It just comes out of nowhere. It doesn't seem to link on from the previous scene. And I was laughing watching it because it was just, it's that beat, isn't it? It's that moment where, the hero has a crisis of like, can I do this? Do I have what it takes? He's my friend. And I mean, you could write that kind of scene in your sleep, but I was looking at all the actors originally they sort of were touting as well. I think always at the back of their mind, well, as we established before the Dalton films, they wanted Pierce Brosnan. They were pretty dead set on that. Apparently other actors were Mel Gibson, Hugh Grant, and Liam Neeson. I mean, he would have been getting early on the action movie trend at that time.
Liam Neeson thing, sorry. His wife at the time, I think he said in interviews, she told him she would divorce him if he took on either the Bond role or action roles. Obviously, she passed away. The skiing, I can't ever remember her name. She was the one from Parent Trap.
Natasha Richardson.
That's it. And obviously, he did the action ones eventually. But I believe that's why he would have been a great M down the line, or so many other things. And you'd have imagined him going to him. But I think he's always been very firm with that. A really good point, actually. That's something I completely forgot to write down. That, especially, I think Ralph Fiennes was a name mentioned, and you got to think. Schindler's List isn't exactly the kind of sort of here's your Bond audition. It's not that kind of film for sure, but it's very much one where, you know, the fact they were looking at Ralph Fiennes as well and Liam Neeson, you would have thought there's some young British actors coming through. And I think you guys mentioned your Goldeneye video as well. Ralph Fiennes at that age would have been phenomenal as a Bond. And I think when he said the words like cold-blooded killer with the eyes, it's very much like the Daniel Craig era we've had. But I don't think they went wrong sort of jumping in that with who they picked. And, you know, there's an alternate universe somewhere with so many different James Bonds. It's incredible. Maybe one day we'll get a Henry Cavill. We'll never know. But it's one of them where I think they made the right choice. And again, sort of looking at what Barbara Broccoli said recently, that the choice they need to make isn't a short-term choice. It has to be long-term. It has to be long-term for the franchise, for the character, and what they want to do. And I think Brosnan, in mind, as you said, Cam, sort of, you know, mid to late 30s, the best age for it. You can get some mileage out of them. I think Craig was a perfect choice as well. Obviously, he's had a lot longer than people would have thought. And, you know, for 16 years, an output of 5 films isn't on paper the best. And, you know, maybe somewhere else you could have had 6 or 7, but that's just bad timing more than anything. But it's certainly for getting Brosnan in the 90s, I think was an absolute coup. And you kind of look at some of those. I mean, I watched Thomas Crown last night, completely irrelevant, but I was like, he's basically playing James Bond stealing art, and it's great. But you buy him because he's so good at playing that kind of role. And I think Goldeneye is what sets everything on course for this franchise and where we might be heading back to, I think, as well in the future.
I mean, my only experience of Brosnan before seeing Goldeneye was Mrs. Doubtfire. So I've only seen being hit in the head with fruit, basically. That's all I've got.
Fruiting.
Yeah. But I agree with what you said. He was the perfect Bond for this film. There can be no doubt about that. And I always refer to Brosnan as kind of a dad Bond. He's got that kind of quippiness. He's kind of like your dad. He makes silly jokes, but he's kind of cool at the same time. Well, most dads. And maybe not mine. But yeah, and that's always how I've seen him. And I was 8 when this film came out. So, of course, he was like the cool dad. And that's how I've always seen Bond. Oh, sorry, Brosnan's Bond.
I've got to bring this up real quick. Comment from Nikolai, who says that Brosnan reminds him of his dad. So I don't think you're off base on that comment right there.
Yeah. I think the franchise needed someone safe, too, to build that franchise back up, because Dalton had lost viewers. They were not on board, especially with License to Kill. And if you want to get to a point where you can do a Daniel Craig and take an unconventional approach to the franchise, you need to build up that fan base and establish again why they care about Bond, why they want to come back for these adventures every couple of years. Well, I would appreciate every couple of years, but that has not been the case as of late. But that was the case back in those days. And so by casting a guy who is a fairly safe choice, who has the performance that works, it can basically ground all the elements that fans love in this franchise, reinvent them in some little ways for, going into the 90s and onwards. But you need this to get to Craig. Like, I think he was very much important in establishing something that was grabbing people, making them excited about a franchise that would then open up future possibilities. I think if you cast like Ralph Fiennes, I love Ralph Fiennes, amazing actor. I love him in the Bond films as well, the way they've used him as M. But I wonder if he would have been a little too intense coming off of Dalton and maybe not as welcoming to an audience that they're trying to get back versus just kind of carry over.
Yeah, and I think, Ralph Fiennes is, revered for playing villainous characters, isn't he? Even now, pretty much. I know he does play M and he does play hero characters, but you think of stuff like In Bruges, my God, Schindler's List, Jesus Christ, films such as that, Voldemort, he's always the villain, and it's because he does have that natural intensity that he brings to all of his roles. So I think he would have been definitely more in the veins of a Dalton. I think they did want to break away from that, and I think money talks as well. I think maybe that they looked at the box office as well and the rating, and maybe that had some backlash at the time as well. I just checked here as well. Apparently, the studio's original choice, this was if they couldn't get Brosnan, was Paul McGann, who, if any Doctor Who fans out there, the 8th Doctor, I think he was in With Nail and I as well, wasn't he? I haven't seen much of his performances, so I can't imagine him as a Bond, I'm going to be honest. So I'm very glad they went with the one that they did. And we have a hot take here as well. I'm going to bring up another one of Nikolai's comments right here. The weakest elements of Goldeneye are Brosnan's performance and Eric Serra's score. We'll talk about the score later because I think that's absolutely fair. I think for me, where I stand with Brosnan at the moment, I've only seen one of his films. And I think this is true for all of the Bonds, really. Their first film or first couple of films is where they're kind of finding their footing a little bit. They're trying to work things out. And it's usually the second or third film where they get it. You go back to Connery, I'd argue that, he's tremendous in Doctor No, don't get me wrong, but he didn't really, come into his own, for me at least, until maybe From Russia with Love or definitely Goldfinger. You could say the same for Moore as well. You had Live and Let Die and Man with a Golden Gun, and it felt like a lot of carryover from the previous incarnations. And it wasn't until The Spy Who Loved Me where it was like, this is Roger Moore's Bond. And I think that's true of all the Bonds. Dalton, we talked about Living Daylights as well, in that, it's kind of this weird hodgepodge, and then he nails it in the second one. And I think this might be the case with this one. I'm not going to say that Brosnan was bad in this film by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's very much a character in a role that he probably gets into a little bit more in subsequent films. But that's my predictions, obviously, because I haven't seen it and I don't know how they all turn out. I've only heard whispers of where it all leads to.
No, that's absolutely fair. I'm not going to kick off a comment. I disagree with the first part, Nikolai. I'm going to be polite in saying that. The score I'm very excited to talk about, because I didn't know that this was a discussion until the last couple of months. Everyone's got differing opinions on the score, so I'm excited to get to that when we do. But really quickly, whilst we're on Bond, we've got to talk about, I guess one of the biggest Bond debuts that would go on to be in the franchise for almost 20 years, Dame Judi Dench as M. I know there's a lot of fans out there, but to me, this is the definitive M. I don't think anyone can come close to that scene. The way she's built up before we actually see her on screen, we get messages in the car, essentially, and the build-up to is great, and you just get that scene where she just destroys Pierce Brosnan in the room. And M is an authoritative character. They need to have the authority on him, and for her first film, very much with the Craig era, it's been sort of kind of maternalish. I'm excited to go back to it, but you needed to make a statement. And Chris, what you said earlier today about the the ending of the Cold War, the 90s stuff, they summarize all of that so well, and I just absolutely love her performance, and she grows and grows, and I think it's well designed enough onwards when M starts to be involved more in the story and the stakes. I think obviously capped off with Skyfall in 2012. I think she is absolutely incredible and one of the best piece of castings in the entire history of the Bond franchise.
I could talk a lot about M, but that scene is critical. I mean, I will slightly paint the picture. She doesn't care this much that she turns her chair. Mm-hmm. And then she's like, "You're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War. I don't care if you die, but come back alive." And it's just like, yes, thank you, because he is an instrument for the British government. He is not a person to her, really. It's not until the Craig year that we have this stranger relationship that seems to develop. But I think it was a very important move to make M a woman, because we had to start having these counterpoints, and we'll get to obviously like Natalia as well as these counterpoints to Bond and the reflection on the Bond that we've had before, and allowing us to try and reframe it for what we have going forward. And I think M was critical with that.
Yeah, I mean, Judi Dench is one of the great hallmarks of this franchise now. Like, when we talk about Bond 30 years, 40 years down the road, they're going to refer to this era as M as being incredibly important, and should probably outshine all of the M's that came before, because just in terms of character, what they gave her was just so often phenomenal. And I think one of my favorite moments, though, is she has that whole scene ripping him down, And again, you say, Scott, she doesn't really regard him as a person, but she also doesn't regard him as a superhero, which is what the franchise often does. It's Bond has all these, quirks, and we love him for them. He goes around, does amazing set pieces. Awesome. What a cool guy. But I like that she doesn't see that. She sees him, as you said, as an instrument. And one of my favorite moments, and it's something I don't know if I caught when I was 14 years old, watching this character just rip apart my beloved, James Bond, but was she says, "Come back alive." And she just has kind of this smirk on her face. Like, you can tell there's a certain amount of show, or sort of like a bit of a power struggle. Like, hey, know your place. But I get you. Like, I understand who you are.
Yeah, she asserts herself right from her very first scene, doesn't she? I'm trying to think as well. Has Bill Tanner, because they kind of build her up through that as well, through that moment where he's talking behind her back. Is this Bill Tanner's first appearance in Bond, or has he been in any previous ones? I'm trying to. I can't place the Tanner character.
He's actually, he pops up. I think it's For Your Eyes Only, and he's just random dude in the room.
Oh, okay.
So it is Tanner. Yeah.
Judging from your expressions, I thought like he'd always been there, and I had like a kind of senile moment, and I just forgotten who he was. But I think this is because I know that Tanner's in the Craig ones, isn't he? I think is it from Skyfall? He's introduced, I think. Is it Skyfall?
Casino is he in all of this? Roy Kinnear, he's in The Crown now.
Yeah, I can't remember which one he starts off in, but I know he's in them anyway. So it was nice to sort of like get Tanner back in that moment where she's standing behind him and heard everything that he says. But she is kind of terrifying in this role. I mean, Judi Dench, just like absolute national treasure, isn't she? She's just incredible in everything that she's in, apart from Cats. Oh God, I can't believe she took that role. I keep forgetting she was in that film.
I'll never forget.
Oh, I know, it's burned into my mind. But yeah, so obviously seeing Casino first and seeing her in that, I mean, she's tremendous in that. So it was nice to sort of go back to this one, knowing that this was her first appearance of the character, and she just knocks it out of the park. The scene that you guys just mentioned, I mean, I don't know what else I can add to that. You can just read so much into that, and the subtleties and nuances in the performance, where she does have a lot of, she likes Bond, you can tell it deep down, but she has to put on that front, and she can't sort of that facade that she puts on. It's a stressful job. Like, she's got to maintain that for everything. And I think actually the decision of, it's been believed here, I'm just reading here, that Stella Remington became head of MI5 in 1992 in real life. So it could have been sort of like an echo of that. But I think there is that sense of, not like female empowerment, because, you still have Bond getting with his evaluator, a very thorough evaluation. But even the moment with Moneypenny as well, a brand new actress playing Moneypenny in this one, and she's like, "I don't believe you've ever had me, James." And there's more references in this of him being misogynist and outdated, and you get that from M, you get that from Moneypenny, the fact that he's being evaluated in the first place at the opening of the film. You could argue the Bond girl as well, how she's more headstrong in this one, and she will, she'll pull no punches, and she will actively call out Bond pretty much all the way throughout the movie. So I think there is, and need we talk about Onatopp and the whole dominating aspect of her character? We'll get to it. But I think that that's definitely at the forefront with this one, but it doesn't jeopardize what makes the character of Bond. Like, he still will get with the women, and that, they are still the Bond girls, you could call them in this film. But I do think that was a conscious aspect and sort of commentary they wanted to bring to the character and the supporting characters as well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is Barbara Broccoli, that she's done a lot in her tenure in terms of what she's done with sort of some of the other characters brought in. And obviously, we'll be able to get to more of Casino Royale, the Craig era, where I think they tried to humanise them as much as possible. Really quickly on M, I don't know if anyone has ever spotted this before. Whenever they unveil her in this film, right, when you get the great sort of camera framing, she looks like Blofeld. And I don't know if it's only ever been me, but I think it's because she's wearing the sort of the same colours as Joan of Twice, and it's the whole like neck thing. But whenever I see her, I always think she looks a bit like Blofeld. It's clearly not intentional. I don't know if anyone else has thought that, but I just wanted to say it because I cannot unthink it. I don't know if that's going to ruin Goldeneye for anybody in the long term now.
I just can't get that image out of my head now.
No, she needs the cat, doesn't she? She needs the white cat in the swivel chair, and she's got it down, I think.
Well, it's weird because, M is introduced in License to Kill, like petting cats, just as a hand petting a cat. Apparently they had a whole thing about M's like having Blofeld allusions to them. I don't know what was going on there.
Yeah, they're drawing a parallel with that. I don't know.
There's a really off topic. Samantha Bond as Moneypenny. We don't get a lot of her in this, but not much to say. Because like I said, I really enjoy her. She feels I mean, I wasn't a fan of Caroline Bliss. I think as 80s is it's going to get big glasses, long blonde hair. Not to sort of criticize it too much, it's only really in this license skill of like 2 seconds. But I like Samantha Bond, and obviously we get a bit more time with her across the next few films. But it's hard to follow in the footsteps of Lois Maxwell, and I think Samantha Bond is maybe the closest we've had to that. I do like what they've done with her in the recent films, but again, it depends on what happens with No Time to Die personally.
I think she's probably the last of the secretary Moneypennies that kind of work, because I kind of like what they do with Moneypenny going forward, but she's not really meant to be a secretary at first. Obviously, there's the whole storyline going into it. I think this is probably her best outing of the 4, maybe tied with the next one, but it's such a thankless role, isn't it, being Moneypenny? It's like, hey, you have a couple of seconds to pop, and if you don't, you'll be forgotten by the film. And I think Samantha Bond does a good job of what she's got. That little witty repartee as he's going in to meet M, as you mentioned before, it's fun.
I think Moneypenny and M serve a function here, though, in that when you look at those Dalton films, they were very uncomfortable with the womanizing Bond, and that was partly to do with the AIDS crisis, but it was always trying to make Bond more like having more, what's the word? Oh my God. Monogamous relationships. Thank you. Monogamous. And so that's something that these characters allow, is because they comment and critique Bond for his womanizing as being a clearly broken dude. It allows them to embrace that element of the character again, because the fact that M and Moneypenny are saying, hey, like, you're a mess. Like, Moneypenny, like, will flirt with him, but she has definitely, more of a tough, spine to her. She's someone who's not kind of fawning over him the way that Lois Maxwell did. I really appreciate that, and it allows Bond to kind of be the classic Bond we know, but there's a commentary going on through those characters.
Yeah, and I mean, my first question to you guys was going to be, do we actually get more of this Moneypenny throughout the 4 films that we have? So I'm pleased to say that she sticks around a little bit longer and we get more to do with her. I mean, Samantha Bond, clearly an actress who was casted based on a name alone, right? But no, I mean, I enjoyed her from her opening scene. There's not much to really say about her character as of right now. I think it's like any character with the first film, you've got to get used to these new incarnations and everything moving forward. No one's going to top Lois Maxwell for me, though. I think I'm pretty dead set on that, probably just for how long she served the character, but I loved what they brought to her character in those earlier films. We've got a comment from Nikolai who mentions that Brosnan is acting very weird and creepy in that scene. I mean, I've seen the film twice. I don't really get that from it. Apparently he's been all like whispery and kind of leering. I haven't noticed that myself. Have you guys?
I wonder
it's
if
a bit odd.
But I wonder if it's also that they're trying to reframe it, because when when Connery or Moore did it, it had more of just like this kind of charm.
Yeah.
Whereas here it comes across as a little, because she even says this could be construed as sexual harassment. Like the fact is, like, they're showing that there's something a little bit darker to it than what was there in the past.
Yeah, and I mean, we've also got allies here as well, and I think we need to talk about at least 2 sort of like key allies before we get on to like the rest of it. And a returning actor as well. This was so weird for me. This was almost as weird as, I always forget the name of the actor, the guy who plays Blofeld in Diamonds Are Forever, who was in the previous Bond film, or previous couple of Bond films, wasn't he? So Joe Don Baker returns, who played our favorite villain Whitaker in The Living Daylights. I'm thankful to say, so he plays the character of Jack Wade in this one. I don't know why they brought him back. Not to say he's bad. I actually love his character in this one, and I think that the actor's personality, I mean, he very much plays a similar character to me than what he did in Living Daylights, but his personality type fits much better the character that they have in this film, and there's not kind of that tonal clash. He plays sort of like the CIA officer in this. Considering they were going like a soft reboot, I mean, you continue Desmond Llewellyn as Q, and you kind of bring this guy back as well in a completely different role. That's so strange to me that they did that, but I kind of love his character. He's probably up there as one of my favorite allies that I've seen in all the Bond films so far. And he does have one of my favorite lines. I don't even know if you can count this as one. It's not a one-liner, but it's just the personality and the quality that the actor brings. There's a moment where he meets with Bond and he like just gets distracted and goes like, banyan trees. And it's so random. I had to write it down. It's so random that it's genius, but I really liked his character. I thought he was a really cool inclusion in the film.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think, from what I read, I would imagine, I've not read into it, this might have been Martin Campbell's choice, that he did a show, I think, in the mid to late 80s that was apparently very good, and he was one of the lead actors in it. So I'm wondering if it might have been Martin Campbell getting him in more so than Eon allowing him back in. But I quite like him in this. And one thing I kind of want to add, that certainly as we get through the Brosnan era, Chris, I know you're not aware of the actor that does pop up in Dinoverse, so I'm very excited to find out about that. But they move away from Felix Leiter, which personally, I've never been a big fan of the character. Like him in Casino, I love Jeffrey Wright, and I like him in License to Kill. But because he's popped up so many different times with different actors, why can't we have another new American? And that's what we get the Jack Wade. And I'll take it because it feels fresh. And there's just something about him that works in Russia, that he looks so uncomfortably naturally there, that I quite enjoy him. So definitely a big step up from Living Daylights as well. And not, again, I think that's still one of the worst villains of the film, but a great ally to Bond in the series. So the master of two different roles, maybe.
And just really quickly, got a comment from Nikolai here saying they chose to create Jack Wade because they didn't want to bring Felix back after his maiming in License to Kill. I don't know if that's true or not, but I can understand that, especially coming, straight after that film that was previously released. I think that's probably why they did it.
I suppose I don't really have much to say about Jodon Baker as Jack Wade. I just think that I'm happy that we haven't got a Felix again. I do get annoyed with the Felixes, and one thing we have a running joke on our podcast about sort of the Felix lame-ometer, like how lame is this Felix? And License to Kill's got a pretty good Felix, except that he gets his leg bit off, but that's pretty cool. But I don't want another, I don't know, Jack Lord or something like that. Okay, he was kind of cool, I guess. But I'm glad they just went a different direction. A completely Americanized guy, Red States, Hick style, CIA guy. That's more fun and interesting in a film that's trying to reinvent the genre a little bit as well. So I think it was probably better than doing a Felix.
What also solves a problem that they had with Felix, which is, who is Felix Leiter? Like, what is his personality? What are his traits? I mean, they change movie to movie. Like, his hair color changes, his height changes. He becomes, like, his ages bounce all over the place. Like, there's no determining specifics in terms of how Felix operates as a character. So it felt like there was a conscious choice here that Jack Wade is very specific. Jodon Baker, that voice is unmistakable. He was actually the star of the Walking Tall films back in the day, though they remade Walking Tall with The Rock years later, but used to go around and beat up bad guys with a 2x4 in movies. And he's a guy he's big, he's burly. They introduce things like the Muffy tattoo. You would not get little bits like that with Felix because they always wanted to keep it fairly vague so they could recast movie to movie. Here, we at least established, we don't know, watching Goldeneye, if Jack Wade's going to come back, but that if he does, you're going to recognize that character right off the bat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just love the personality that he brings as well. And I think when we did our Living Daylights review, one of the guys off Really 007 mentioned that the personality of the actor himself, he's a very sort of approachable, fun, nice guy in real life. So those traits is why his villain didn't work in Living Daylights, because he just has, that natural charm and really nice personality to him. But I like that he was able to bring that in this one, and he was that helpful character. And you mentioned big and burly. I think there's one big and burly ally that we have to talk about in this one. This was a huge surprise to me. I did not know he was going to be in this film, and I'm so glad that he is. We have the character of Valentin Zukovsky, played by the one and only Robbie Coltrane, Rubeus Hagrid himself, and he's incredible. George, I said this to you after we finished the film. I love characters that are the kind of villainous, like the anti-hero characters, but they'll have their lackeys behind them and they'll say a joke and they'll laugh and look over their shoulders to make sure the lackey's laughing. I love characters like that. He's immense, his personality, and I love that they establish very early on that Bond has had a history with this guy. I love the line, yeah, he gave him the limp. So that just sets you up perfectly for that. And I actually didn't know the actress who plays his mistress literally until right before we went live on this thing. So that's kind of blew my mind. And that's probably one of the funniest moments in the film for me, where she's or just singing Stand By Your Man just horribly. It's like, Stand By Your Man. It's so great. Love that scene to death.
Yeah, it's amazing. The Mini Driver thing is great because I'm not going to I didn't know who she was, and I've never known it. And then my friend texted last week, like, well, you know me, musicals. I just don't know it. And I was text saying, look at this photo of Pierce Brosnan in Cinderella. I was like, oh, yeah, I've heard about this. And she's like, he's with Mini Driver. I was like, I don't know who she is. And anyway, I was doing some research for God, and I was like, Mini Driver. I was like, wait, hold on. This is the person that I was speaking to about recently. I was like, I have seen a Mini Driver film. And I was like, she's Hagrid's mistress in her Goldeneye. Not a great way to sell it, someone that doesn't like James Bond. I'm going to say that, but it's a wonderful scene. I mean, it's the Brosnan humor, though, isn't it? And what I love about the villain, not when they turn around, when he says, who strangled the cat. And he has to think for a couple of seconds, like, what does he mean by strangling the cat? And it's just such a great way to do it, the whole humor type stuff. And I think what I love about sort of Robbie Coltrane in this, and he's a character that we don't have to see the history. And I think you guys mentioned it about Natalia in your video. We'll get to that as well. With the Brosnan era, we are meeting characters who have already had stories or interactions with Bond. It's not necessarily, I'm meeting him, and now we're going to find out everything about them. This is us going to a time period where James Bond has already been a spy, and he already has a history with people back and forth over years. And you'd watch that nowadays with I always call him Hagrid, so hard not to with Valentin, but when it's like you'd think, oh, have I like missed a film where he gave someone a limp or something? And there's none of that. It's that this is something that happened off screen, and I think that's what the Brosnan era did really well, was start to provide a bit of, I don't even say it's context, but they're just not treating us as dumb that we have to see it to understand it, and it builds up relationships, and also it saves time with the plot. You could lose 20 minutes trying to do things like that. So I really enjoy him, and I love getting these supporting characters, and it's one scene, and he has such a tremendous impact with that one scene.
It's just good world building. Like, you walk into it and you have a fully fleshed out character by the end in about 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. And I do tend to lamp on Coltrane's accent in this scene. I think it does really just fly back and forth between Russian and Scottish. Mm-hmm. It's borderline at times. He's like, Walter PPK, I'm from Scotland, O'Kyle the New. I killed the 3 men who had one. And okay, fine. But it's just great anyway. It's like a panto performance. Just lean into it.
What I love, too, is that this whole scene feels like it feels like Bond's almost wandered into another movie. Somewhere there's an entire other movie about crime lord, Valentin Zukovsky just going about his various dirty dealings. And I would totally watch that movie. And I always think that's an interesting thing to do with Bond films, is that, Scott says world building. That's a great, usage there. But also just like all these little worlds that Bond kind of wanders into. You think of Man with the Golden Gun, which we covered. There's the arms guy who sells weapons, right, to Scaramanga. Like, that feels like a whole little world that operates unto itself that Bond's wandered into. That's what I love with the Zukovsky stuff. The only thing that drives me absolutely crazy with Zukovsky is that the way they set him up, where you have Jack Wade and Bond talking, and he says, I gave him the limp. And then we cut to this weird shot of them driving, where it's obviously not the actors, and it's just ADR on the soundtrack going, so you're saying you shot him in the knee, stole his girl, and now he's going to help you? Yep. It's like it's like they didn't trust the audience to pick up what Bond and Wade had said mere seconds before that. That moment is so lazy, it drives me out of my mind. But it's quickly erased once Coltrane shows up because it's so charismatic. I would watch Valentin Zukovsky pop up in every Bond movie. Keep him going. You know what? That should be the next Bond. Just cast Zukovsky as Bond. I want to continue this franchise with him.
And that was the first thing that I said when I came out. I think I latched on straight away to Robbie Coltrane. George, I think you wanted to hear me talk about, what did you think of Brosnan, Sean Bean, Onatopp and everything. I was just like, no, Robbie Coltrane, I've got to talk about him first. I really hope he crops up in another film. I don't know if he does or not. So I'm either going to be very, happy or very disappointed if that doesn't happen. But yeah, I guess I just love seeing Bond in the environment of like a really crummy dive bar as well. I think the last time that happened was Live and Let Die. When Bond goes in the booth and it turns right. I just love that image. And this really kind of sleazy, crappy bar where you've maybe got like 2 punters in there and there's this awful song and dance number going on the stage. I love stuff like that. I think that covers it for Allies. I think. Oh, hang on. Comment. Yeah, go on, George.
Love for Coltrane in the comments, which is just there
Chef's
from
kiss.
Nikolai and Dave.
Absolutely. Let's see if we've got that love for the Bond girl in this one. We're going to save one of them for the villains because she's not. She kind of toes the line between being one or the other. Let's talk about the one Bond girl in this one, really, and that's Natalia Simoneover, played by Isabella. Oh God, Scorupco. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I love this character, and again, I always kind of champion the Bond girls that have, a point in the plot, and they're not there just to be seen, and not heard kind of thing, as you get like an Ursula Andress in like the earlier Bond films. We talked about the Bond girl in Man with the Golden Gun, like the irritating ones that are just completely helpless. I like the ones that get stuck in and aren't afraid to call Bond out on something, and she's exactly that character. She's a programmer, and they establish very early on that she's very good at what she does. One of my favorite lines, which kind of sums up a character and her attitude that she has to people, is where she goes to that kind of tech place and she says, like, I need so many modems, so many monitors and everything like that. And he's like, do you need a demonstration? She's like, no, I've got it. And then, she's working, I think she's communicating with Boris at the time. And he comes in, he's like, is everything okay? She's like, everything except the interruption. I just love that. It's the greatest put down, I think, that she has in this film. But she's great. No, I love her character. It's the moment where, she's in the back of the helicopter and she's, yelling Bond to wake up and everything. Boys with toys, all that stuff. I think she's tremendous. I don't know if she's one of my favorites, again, because there's just so many and I'm going to have to sort of like rank them in my head at some point. But a really good Bond girl, I think, for this one. It's not the, rebooting the franchise. It would be so easy for them to go, oh, we just need to get this glamour model in. She needs to get a kit off and let's just parade her around. They don't do that. And I'm quite happy that they didn't do that. It almost feels more akin maybe to the Dalton things, that you have one predominant Bond girl. I'm not going to say he's completely not misogynistic, completely monogamous in this one, because, you have the person who's evaluating him at the beginning, and you do have Onatopp thrown in there as well. So he seems a bit more promiscuous than maybe Dalton, but I like that you just have predominantly your one Bond girl in this one.
Yeah, I think she's quite underrated, that whenever you watch Goldeneye, she's great. But Natalia's never been in that sort of discussion that people have with sort of Tracy and Vesper. And I do think she's very interesting, especially given the context that, this was a new era and whatnot. And this is, as far as I'm trying to think in my head, I'm just trying to sort of scan through the sort of previous 16 films, but she's one of the first ones that feels integral to the plot. I know a lot of them are in their own way, but in terms of circumstances, sort of not allegiance, but background history with other characters, it's not someone that just pops up, meets her, and pops along for the journey. This is somebody that's on her own journey, and her past crosses with Bond, and they're working towards the same thing. I don't know if that's just me that thinks, but I absolutely love her in this. I think she's great. I don't know if anyone else has got too many memories in the 64 game, but maybe because you have that awful mission when she always dies in the game, if anyone remembers that.
Control room?
Yeah, and it's just, you get aggrieved, and you watch, goes, this is real life, this isn't a game anymore. And she's great. So I really like her. And I think she works perfectly in the scene she's with Brosnan. They've got a good chemistry with one of her. But the beach scene is a bit weird. I think that's probably the weirdest scene of the entire film for me. There we go. Yeah.
Except for that damn beach scene. It's like that scene in Rocky, isn't it? It's like, all right, I'm afraid. All right, you want to hear me say it? I'm afraid. It's just, why is it always on a beach, those kind of conversations? Why do they always happen there?
I mean, the masochist in me really wants to make my alarm just her going, wake up, mister, wake up! But I think I'd smash my phone across the room every day. It would wake me up at least. But I just to echo, what you both said, really, I think she's one of the first Bond girls to have her own arc, independent of Bond. She has her own story. They're crossing paths and they have a common enemy, which is great. But she could have her own film, and it would be fine, and it would make sense. You don't need Bond. She doesn't, and he doesn't need her necessarily. They both just get to the end and have the same completion, which is good.
Yeah, what I really love about Natalia, she feels like an evolution of what they've been trying to do leading up to this. I think of Melina in For Your Eyes Only, who's on her revenge mission, who crosses into Bond's world. So this feels like a better version of that, where I feel like even with Melina, they're still portraying the Bond girls at that point through how Bond sees them. Whereas once we get to people like Kara and Pam Bouvier in Dalton, we have more access to how they're feeling in a moment. So our sympathy is actually with them. It's not just how they are viewed through the eyes of Bond. So this feels like the next extension of that, where we are entirely sympathetic to everything Natalia is going through right from the beginning, you know, surviving the Goldeneye attack and everything, and her mission that leads her into Bond. But also, we're getting like private moments with her where we actually understand who she is as a person, which was not something, you know, you go back to like You Only Live Twice, you ain't getting anything like that. So it feels like this is the best of what they've done at this point. There's obviously elements to Tracy as well that are incredibly strong. Mm-hmm. That one, there's also some very problematic stuff in terms of, you know, the way the relationship between her and her father and Bond and the arrangements there. It's pretty sketchy stuff. Whereas I feel like Natalia was what they needed to kind of reinvigorate this franchise in 1995, and it really did lead the way to writing characters like Vesper and what have you in, you know, Casino Royale.
Mm-hmm. I do agree, though, that, I mean, being kind of like a fledgling to the Bond franchise, I don't know if it's a name that crops up a lot of times, her character in this film, if she's often overlooked as one of the Bond girls in the grand scheme of things, but I really liked her. So this is quite an interesting one now. If we move on to villains, because we've got a few to talk about, but I can't remember which one it was on. I think we were speaking with the Really 007 guys, and we were kind of, you know, already back then when we were talking about that one, we were hyping up Goldeneye. And the main villain I was looking forward to seeing was Sean Bean. Sean Bean's one of my favorite actors. I couldn't wait to hear him, you know, bring his Sheffieldness to this role. And he slips in and out of it. It's very similar to the Robbie Coltrane thing you mentioned, where he slips in and out of his native accent. But I think the guys on that mentioned that, which main villain? There's 5 of them. And I thought, is it kind of like this Fox Force 5 kind of thing where you're going to have like, you know, major villains? And I do still think he is the main villain. I think everyone else just kind of fills like a henchman role. You know, some have more screen time than others in there, but I would definitely still say that Sean Bean is very much the main villain, even if he doesn't crop up properly in the film until the halfway point. But I think we're going to end with his character. I think we're going to sort of go through almost like a tier list of the villains in this film. So let's start with, oh my God. His full official title, Colonel Arkady Grigorovich Oromov, played by Gottfried John. You have to say a name like that in some kind of like awful Russian accent, don't you? I loved his villain. I think a lot of it is down to, I mean, he felt like an actor that I've seen in something before. He's got a very distinctive look. And I think he plays a great villain in this one. He's really kind of terrifying at the opening. And, you know, he is that kind of jackbooted character that will just walk in and get the job done. The actor like brings loads of different nuances to it as well. I love when he I think he visits the minister, isn't it, or something, and he tells him that there's been an extra person who escaped during the Goldeneye attack, and it's almost like his eyes twitching, and he's like, I will take care of this immediately or something, and rushes out of the room. So he has a really great villainous presence, and even during the tank chase, I love the little moments where he's got his little hip flask and he's like drinking to calm his nerves when Bond's charging after him in a tank. It's just little moments like that for me that add up to the character. But he is kind of the villain that you stick with through the first act of the film, and I think as a villain that, you know, establishes that kind of role initially at the beginning, I think is tremendous. Hey, there we go.
Perrier, it's what you need to keep going through a Bond podcast every time.
Freeze frame, Perrier.
I remember he's really slimy, right? And that's not a word I use often for villains, but there's something about him that's so great that, you know, how many Russian stereotypical villains have we had in the Bond era? You know, we've had the Cold War, and, you know, I mean, we love General Orlov, but some of them just feel like it's just a standard Russian thing. But every time he comes on screen, he's like sweating, and you're there like, this is a guy that he's trying to be sly. He's not very good at being sly, but he's clearly getting results because he's been getting promotions behind the scenes, which I love. And I love that Bond has, when Judi Dench has a flirt with him, Bond's like, oh, we got a promotion, and you can tell there's that personal stuff between them. But the tank chase, he's the highlight of, I mean, no, he's not the highlight of the tank chase, ignore that. But, you know, if you're going to cut away from the action, you know, if it's not pedestrians flinging themselves off bridges to try and avoid a tank being squashed by him, it's just it's the slow progression of how much he's shitting it. That, you know, it starts off, he's kind of composed and calm, and suddenly he sweats more, he's drinking more, and, you know, he's trying to shout at them where to go. I absolutely love him. But I think the bit that sells him for me on all of it, and I'm not going to get too contextual on the politics of it, I love the fact that he obviously doesn't trust Trevelyan because he's a caustic, but because that's the real life history of it all. And I love that they play that yes, he is a villain, but he's clear in that mindset of, Russia, USSR being this big thing, and he cannot accept the same way that Robbie Coltrane makes comments about Trevelyan as well, that it's about the history, you can never trust them. And I love all that kind of stuff, but Oromov's great, and I don't like his kind of death. I wish he had something a bit more dramatic, and I think with the Bond films, I don't know if it was that obvious in the sort of 90s, but as the years have gone by, the over-the-top deaths are what makes them. I think, if you have a villain that goes out on such a boring way, it's not something you want. And I think the others in this have great send-offs, except Oromov, and he could have had something incredible, especially with the scene with the tank.
There's a reason why Urumov is the mascot of SpyHards podcast. And that is because, much like him, we are completely out of our depth when we're talking about things. And he is a sweaty man. If you think of, like, I don't know, the Justice League, okay? You've got Batman, you've got Superman, Wonder Woman, all these fantastic people. And then you've got Aquaman. And he could talk to fish, okay? He's the butt of everyone's joke. Oromov is the Aquaman of the Justice League. That is, the lineup of villains in this film. He is the completely useless, except for maybe one function guy, and he knows that he is out of his depth.
He's also a little bit like Peter in Deadpool 2 when they're assembling the team. So like everyone has their thing, and they're like, "What about Peter? I don't know, he's a nice guy, I guess." I love Oromov because he just feels like he's on the back foot like the whole time. He's dealing with Bond, who's so far beyond, his punching range that it's like that's a lot of the comedy to me is Oromov just looking like flustered and baffled as to what's going on, and he tries to carry himself like the big bad, Russian villain who's going to be an opposing force, but he's so clearly not. You put him next to like Xenia, and he looks like vaguely uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Everything that's going on, he's just like what? In the back of the car when the tank's chasing him and he's drinking. It's like this guy has wandered in from a movie that just doesn't like he belongs in something with a more modest, low-level stakes. He's not fit for a James Bond world. And I agree, though, his death is underwhelming. Like, I feel like this guy, they give, we'll talk about Boris in a second, but they give Boris like a really fun, like over-the-top death, right? The one that is very much appropriate for the character. I think there was a way to do that with Oromov, where it's a guy who's just kind of this, in some ways, a fool throughout the movie. I think they could have given him kind of a somewhat fun, but also over-the-top death. That would have been more fitting.
Yeah, you mentioned his reaction, how he looks uncomfortable when Xenia's machine gunned everyone down. But to me, in that situation, with how she's acting during that whole scene, I think that's a very believable reaction. I think that's how I'd react. Like, what the fuck? Like, I love that part. We'll get onto it in a second, but I think sort of like the array of villains that we have in this film, I always kind of go to this as an example, but the villains in Octopussy for me are so varied and so under any other direction or screenwriting, it'd just be a complete clusterfuck of villains that don't kind of link into each other in any way. You have the very almost similarly named General Orlov in that film, who's this crazy cartoony villain. You've got Kamal Khan, you've got his henchmen, and then you've got the knife throwing Mishka and Grishka, and it's no qualities about these characters kind of link with each other. And I guess there's more of a link with this one. You've got the whole hacking thing. This was the mid-90s, so of course hacking had to be in everything, didn't it? You've got that, and you do have the Russians, but you do have some crazy cartoony villains in this film. And do we want to talk about Boris first, or do we just want to like rip the Band-Aid off and start talking about Famke Janssen in this film? Where should we go? Give me direction on this.
I think we should get on the top of it.
Oh, there we go. I'm going to get rid of that one-liner. There's one gone. Okay, so which review was it? George, I don't know if this was you just telling me about this, sort of like prepping me for this film. You mentioned the simping fan base. That's the only way that I can describe it. And, we have had some simping over subsequent, previous reviews that we've done, and it's fair. But you warned me going into this one that this was kind of the leader of all of the simping of all these films. So I didn't know anything about her character. I just knew that Famke Janssen was in this film. That was it. I didn't know anything regarding her character. She might be one of my favorite characters out of all the Bond films so far, because she's completely over the top. I love what she brings to the role. She's just fucking bonkers. She's just nuts. she loves killing. She gets turned on by it, and I'm kind of here for it. It's great. It's just what this film needs. You need that kind of cartoony character. She just loves what she does, and it's just so much. I could have watched the whole film with her. I will say though, kind of similar to what you just mentioned with Oromov, the death does kind of underwhelm me.
Yeah,
we get an all right one-liner out of it afterwards with her. She always did enjoy a good squeeze, but the actual impact of the death, I didn't feel it. And the first time I watched it, I thought she was still going to be alive. You know, she gets snagged and sort of like pulled into the tree. You needed some kind of bone-breaking sound or like a back-cracking sound, and it's the shot choice as well. It's filmed just quite flat, her death. So that part kind of let me down, but my God, Xenia Onatopp, just the name alone and just everything. It's we've mentioned Chef's Kiss, Robbie Coltrane, the Chef's Kiss for me, Famke Janssen in this film. And she comes into the film really early on as well, that amazing sort of car chase that you get, an old girlfriend, does he say, or something. So again, that world building, that history, you kind of introduce the character without really having to properly introduce her. You've got the scene right after that at the table. So you're pulling those sort of like iconic Bond elements where Bond's sitting across the table from, this absolutely gorgeous woman at some kind of roulette table or baccarat table. So you have all those Bond elements, but then she's just completely off her tits, isn't she? The whole movie. I'm rambling at this point, and I'm sure we're going to get a lot of Xenia appreciation in the comments right now. But George, what's your take on Xenia Onatopp?
Yeah, just going back to what I said, I think it was our View to a Kill video. Essentially, we did it live because we've not done many of these live, and we don't know how it got into it. People started talking about Xenia in the chat at the side. Obviously, Chris hadn't seen it or was aware of it. I was like, let's trying to calm it down. Chris hasn't seen Goldeneye yet, and I've been very much trying to protect you because it is one of the most insane characters of the entire Bond franchise. There is nothing like it before it, and there's been nothing like it after. And it's a fascinating one because, obviously, I think a lot of us were probably, a lot of people either saw Goldeneye before X-Men or X-Men after Goldeneye. And I'm in the camp that I knew her, of course, from X-Men, and even in X-Men 3, she's like killing people while kind of kissing them. It's a different conversation. But I remember when I eventually got to Goldeneye, I was like, is that a young Jean Grey? And then I was like, that's not even really Jean Grey, is it? This is nothing like Jean Grey. I'm trying to, I don't know if I have to do it. What I'm going to try and talk about getting into it is if you look at the first half of the film, they treat her like the villain. He's following her. She's part of a syndicate, but until Sean Bean comes along, even to the point where he meets Sean Bean again, he has to knock her out cold, which is, I hope this isn't on Terrible Live, it's one of the funniest scenes of the film. I'm glad that everybody laughed at the cinema when we were there, was when he does a proper old school Roger Moore karate chop on the back of her head. I don't know why it's funny. I think it's just because she drops like she's sleeping. You're expecting like a car horn sound effect, like GT or something. But she's one of them where I think, because she is great, aside from the on-top killing people, sex, all that stuff, I think she is fantastic as a sort of femme fatale, villainous Bond girl. But then you add in this insane cartoonish characteristic, which is, of course, okay, so I watched this again this morning, right? And, I had to stay off work, so I was watching in the morning. My sister's like in one of the other rooms downstairs working. And then it got to the first scene with the Admiral. I was like, get the sound, turn it down straight away. And she's one of those characters where, it's the few. And then, like, when I was finished off, Dad came down and watched us. It was like, okay, he's missed the bathroom scenes, but she's such an incredible character, and it's amazing that I'm not the attraction what people had. But had I been at that sort of like Megan Fox age when Transformers came out, this would probably be it. And I really want to say about Family because I've not seen her in a lot of things, but I remember I actually saw one of my work friends tonight, and he works at the Stray Masters Comic Cons. He volunteers every year for it, and we were just chatting. I was like, oh yeah, I've been on Goldeneye hype, and I was like, when Famke Janssen went, like, I fully understand why she created social distancing for that. That I don't know if you guys have seen pictures of her at conventions with fans. There is a line, a divide, and normally I'm like, it is what it is. But when you see a film, you see Goldeneye, you're like, there has to be a line because she has probably had some absolute nutcases over the year trying to see her in person and stuff. So Xenia Onatopp is she's one of my favorite hench. I mean, she's a hench woman, but Yeah, I'm waffling as well. It's really hard to talk about. I don't know why.
We've got to call it out right now. Nikolai's just right there. He's sussed us out, hasn't he? Getting flustered talking about it. I'm trying so desperately not to get this channel cancelled. Like, I want to say what I actually want to say, but I'm trying to be as respectful as possible. Maybe it'll come out on the next time it circles back to me. Guys, what do you think of Xenia Onatopp?
I'll say it. She's a sexy lady.
Yeah.
I like
She's a
sexy
handsome woman.
ladies. That's
Yeah,
fine.
understatement.
There's nothing wrong with being like something you're attracted to. I mean, they're portraying sex in this film. It's part of it, and that's fine. It's good to acknowledge it. But like, even now, you think of like Resident Evil 8. I know it's a video game, not connected, but like Lady Dimitrescu, big tall woman smothering, and there's men online like, oh, I want her to smother me. Like, okay, lads, maybe chill on that. But we've been doing it for a very long time. I think like the Amazons in Futurama, death by snoo snoo, and yeah, we like our, I don't know, weird fixations, and getting smothered by her legs is perhaps one of them. But I'll unless we've acknowledged this, and we're all tripping over our words because we're all getting a bit hot and flustered like Oromov right now. The flop sweat's coming. But let's look at her from another angle. There's all good angles.
Yeah.
She almost had Bond, and that's one of the reasons why she's always remembered. Because if Natalia hadn't have whacked her over the back of the head, he wouldn't have got the upper hand, and then she wouldn't have had that weird death in a tree. He was almost dead, and that would have been the end of your film. Obviously, you're not going to kill Bond, are you? Mm-hmm. But in terms of Bond villains and Bond hench people, that's why she's fondly remembered, aside from the femme fatale angle.
And I think she feels like an evolution of some of the characters like Fiona Volpe, Fatima Blush that we've seen before in the franchise. And it's just, they found the perfect gimmick with her. Because you look at Odd Job, you look at Jaws, what made them iconic was the gimmick. It's the hat, it's the teeth. With her, they were like, give her the killer thighs. That makes her, in many ways, more iconic than a Fiona Volpe, another character I love, but doesn't have that sort of thing going for her. And I like that they play her as incredibly dangerous. There's that scene in the spa where they're fighting in the steam room, and like he's hurling her all over the place, but it doesn't matter. Like, you can't hurt her because she feels like pleasure from pain. Mm-hmm. So she's just leaping back on him. And it's like, you can understand how this would be a very formidable, terrifying character where the more you like hurt them, the more excited they are and like wanting to attack you even more. It's something that like, the franchise actually realized they hit a home run because they try to do this pleasure, pain kind of confusion thing in the next couple Brosnan movies too.
Do they?
It gave birth to the facial. It gave birth to his facial expression that became the meme in all of his films. That whenever Brosnan's in pain, it's like the popping of the neck and everything. And I think that's what kind of sells it. Is how he acts like. This is brilliant, Pierce. Let's get you doing this facial expression in every film. Yeah, and I just think it's incredible. I don't know this, but you are right, absolutely. That because she has essentially beaten him, I think that does add to it.
And I mean, also just like the arch villains or the henchmen, I should say, going forward, they bring a pain pleasure thing as well. So it's like it unleashed the Brosnan jaw acting as well as they were like, let's try to recreate that. And I don't think they ever do. And there's a pretty darn good reason when they talk about, Bond henchmen, they typically go like, oh, Jaws, Odd Job, Xenia. It's kind of like they don't even really think twice about putting her in that very high canon. Mm-hmm. And Famke Janssen just chews into this role. Like, from everything I've seen, because Scott, you and I have both seen her at Star Trek cons, and we're familiar with her from that circuit. Very shy person. Like, it seems like very introverted, shy person. But you watch, the sex scene she has with the Admiral here, or that fight scene with Bond, and it is just an actor going for it. Mm-hmm. And she's relatively new in her career at this point as well. And talk about just like coming out of the gate, making your statement right away. Like, there's a reason she's had a pretty good career, and it's because she's so memorable in this performance.
Yeah.
And she...
I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, just to add to Cam's point, there's a reason why she broke a rib in that sauna scene in real life. It's because she told Pierce Brosnan to throw her around. They wanted to make it believable, and he did. He threw her against the wall, and she popped a rib.
She probably thought this is going to be my one chance to ask Pierce Brosnan to throw me around a room, so I'm going to make the most of it.
I keep emailing him, but he won't reply.
So there's some kinky bastards on the writing department of this film, and I'm absolutely here for it. I want to bring this comment up from earlier, actually. Dave, the Life of Brian, says, "Is it just me, or does Onatopp look like she would struggle to even crush a grape with her thighs, let alone kill someone? I don't care. It's the magic of movies where fantasy and wonder can happen." And anything can happen in 007. So, gentlemen, I think we handled that section with tact and respect. So we made it through it. Congratulations. I'm sure we could talk more about the character. Everything from it, just like the snarls, the growls, the little things she throws in. She's tremendous in this film. We need to talk about another X-Men cast member here who played Nightcrawler in X-Men 2, one of my favorite X-Men. We have Alan Cumming as Boris. Where's his full name? Boris Krishenko. And again, I've got to do that. You can't say those names without doing the accent. What a wonderful character. I did not know he was in this film. So seeing his name in the opening credits was a tremendous surprise for me. And I looked forward to seeing his character. And I didn't know that he was going to have such a big role as he does in the film. I do have a pen. I don't have a Parker pen, though, but the whole little gimmick thing that he has, I've been doing that constantly after watching this film. It's just something I naturally now do, trying to emulate the character. And, you know, Cam, you talked about just chewing the scenery like Famke Jensen. Like, he absolutely does that as well. Like, the accent, it's so over the top. It's so ridiculous. And, I mean, it's the one-liner, right? I'm invincible. Like, they were trying so hard to make that thing, that line a thing in this film. And it's great. It's one of the best, and it gets such a great payoff at the end of the film as well. I don't know because I've only seen it twice. I don't know all the lines like off by heart or anything to quote it properly, but the bit where he's chewing the scenery the most for me is either his introductory scene where he kind of moves his chair over behind and he's like trying to like talk about the password, or it's the bit where he's like, she changed the access codes, or like, she doesn't even have access to the file. I can't remember what he says. He's great, and I love Alan Cumming. He's a tremendous actor, and what a wonderful character in this film.
I have such a fun time in Boris, and you know, I always bring that the James Bond Encyclopedia book as a kid. His photo is the invincible pose as well, which is it's just such a highlight that, you know, you've got Sean Bean, the intense villain. You've got an army general, you've got Xenia the sadistics, and then it's like, we need to have a hacker. And nothing says hacker like the 90s. It's the Jim Carrey gif, isn't it? The clawing at the thing. And it's the way he goes, because obviously he's theatre trained. And normally I'd imagine a lot of people would get funny about Rosses, but he seems like he's having the time of his life in it. The way, like, every pronunciation, like, you know, like slughead, like, when he gets to talk about the American stuff, he's so good in it. And when you really think about the core story, his involvement, that, you know, all these characters, none of them are ever just a henchman that is there that doesn't do anything. Every single one of these henchmen has a clear and definitive role to play for Sean Bean's sort of plan. And ultimately, you can argue Boris is the most important, that he was the inside person. He's got the personal story of Natalia as well. And I just think it's great. I love all the computers. Very Jurassic Park with the whole, you know, password, the animation of Boris. I don't know if this was done afterwards or before that. So Jurassic Park came out 2 years earlier, whether, you know, the whole hacking was in place beforehand. So it's a really interesting one, but I love him. His payoff is great. And just the fact that he survived almost all of it until then, that he is the last villain standing for a couple of seconds is just phenomenal. And he wears a Hawaiian shirt.
He probably will be the last villain standing because he's frozen for all eternity in liquid nitrogen, so he's probably going to be around for a while.
Do you think that could be at a museum? Like, it wasn't the Bond Museum. Like, somewhere there is probably like an Alan Cumming statue of Bonds, like the Rocky
probably
statue
in his living room now.
You would definitely keep that, wouldn't you, if it existed? You would sneak that off set just to confuse your other half. Yeah. Scare the living daylights out of them. But it's weird. He's got such a memorable scene, obviously, you know, Invincible stuff, and how he goes out is a really cool way as well. It doesn't really top 006, but it's probably one of the other good deaths in the film. Mm-hmm. I was watching an interview with him today about this, and he said that he refers to himself as the first Bond boy. And I found that to be a really interesting take on it, because he doesn't really ever flirt with Bond, or there's nothing there in that sense. There's nothing sexual going on. Mm-hmm. I just thought that was quite a cute way of looking at it, in the sense that, like, he sees himself as sort of eye candy for I don't know, for the girls and queer people watching as well. And I quite like that take on it, actually. I might look at it in that angle from now on, but otherwise, he's just a really enjoyable hacker.
Yeah, I mean, the Jurassic Park energy is there. Because the pop-up screens and everything, it's like the Dennis Nedry stuff. And also, there's a shot, after the Goldeneye attack, where you see the monitors coming down on top of Natalia and she's screaming. I'm pretty sure that's almost the exact same shot as the dinosaur bones falling on Lex at the end of Jurassic Park. So I think there was, Jurassic Park had a massive impact. So it wouldn't shock me if they were drawing a little bit there. But to their credit, Boris doesn't feel like Dennis Nedry. Like, there's big differences in the characters. And my favorite, I think, Boris moment, maybe when he's just screaming and shaking the monitor at the end as the things like burning up in the atmosphere. That always makes me laugh. And I mean, they also play like he's not just a kind of a comedic villain. Like, you have that moment where he's like screaming at Natalia and he goes to like punch her. And you're like, whoa, like this, they could have easily just been like, no, don't do that. Play him more as Goofy. But they actually show that this guy's really vicious and an awful human being, which then makes the payoff of him being frozen seconds later that much more rewarding.
Yeah, and the audience was just there for it, especially seeing it on the big screen. Like, I'm so glad that everyone there would obviously be like a Bond fan or a Goldeneye fan or whatever, and just it was like watching. It was like being at just like laughing at everything. It was like a comedy show, wasn't it? Really, with some of like the one-liners, everything. Everyone was in on it, especially with Alan Cummings' character as well. They knew it was coming as well, but I was no pun intended with the name, but. It was just so much fun to see it just and be in that crowd and being with that energy, especially with some of the lines that he has towards the end of the film. And I guess the last villain that we need to talk about is the one and only Sean Bean, which was definitely the thing I was most interested about this film going into it, knowing barely anything about it except the fact that he was in it. So the character of Alec Trevelyan, I think that's how you pronounce it, or Janus, isn't it? Janus, his name. That's such a great Bond villain. I mean, we talked about like the opening scene and the history that he has with Bond, and it was great to see that as well, them go on that mission. And then he's kind of out of it for a long time, and I think that was the thing that sort of, it makes for a great reveal. You know that he's going to be in there, that he's probably going to come back, but the fact that he's out of the movie for so long, usually with villains, they're kind of in it throughout, and they're like a constant presence, but they really build him up, and I love the set design in that place as well, where you've got sort of like the destroyed statues of all like the Soviet stuff. Thematically, it's very much on the nose. Like I get it, I get what you're trying to suggest with everything, but it was just such a unique thing. I think it doesn't fade to black, fade back in, and it's like this graveyard almost that they're in. But I thought it was a really interesting backdrop for the character. I mean, it's Sean Bean. Like I could just put a full stop right after it there. There's not really much else to say. I was kind of hoping he'd have his Sheffield accent the entire way through, but it's like, for England, James. And it's this very posh, upper class British voice, which was fun. But yeah, he's great. I did already know his death scene, though. I did see that on a clip for something. I don't know if it was some kind of like best Bond moments, but I knew that he was crushed by something that fell. And as soon as we got to that giant, I don't even know what it is. It's not a satellite, is it? What would you call it?
Antenna?
Antenna, thank you. I knew that was going to be the thing that came crashing down. So as soon as and that's a great set piece as well, just that whole like final thing. There is some very ropey matte paintings or rear projection, especially during that fight scene on the antenna itself. The background doesn't look as blurry enough. It looks completely in focus, so it almost looks like they're 2 feet off the ground fighting on this antenna. And then obviously the camera pulls back and he falls ages. How he survives that fall, I don't know, but I love that he does, because it makes for such a great death scene. We talked about some of the death scenes in this one for the villains aren't that great, or they lack that punch to it. This is a great death scene. This is probably one of the best villain death scenes out there.
And on top of that, Sean Bean is not someone that shied away from the death scene over the years. This stands out as one of the best Sean Bean death scenes, which I think gives it more than many others. But he's such a welcome addition to Bond, because what we said earlier, it's so cool to see the agents together. And I've got this sort of, I'm not going to sort of talk Star Wars, but you know how we always speak about Qui-Gon Jinn? Like, would he have gone to the dark side? Would he have joined Count Dooku? And everyone's like, no, never. I love that when Sean Bean's talking to him, like, James, I would have asked you to come. And Bond has this hesitation where I think he would have maybe potentially done it. I don't think he still would have fully, but there's at least enough in there. The performance between the two of them is believable, that Brosnan could have turned. And what you build up off their friendship over the years, I think it's a really fascinating backstory for the pair. But the really big thing is I didn't know what Cossacks were. I always thought it was like a fictional thing that they created for a Bond villain. So when I hit that age where you find out this was real things, I was like, it's a very smart way for them to bring that into this story as well. It's quite tragic when you read into it at the same time, but you know what you're going to get with Sean Bean. It's really unfair to say because at this point in time, I think he was still a bit younger, and I wouldn't say he's a. I don't know what made him an A-list. I know he did a lot of TV shows first in England, but
Sharp was a big one, I think.
Yeah, that's what my dad mentioned. He watched it at the end of me staying. He saw the last hour, and the usual Sean Bean hits. I was like, well, there's no way he's going to survive that. I was like, well, you've obviously forgotten what's coming next, haven't you? But I think he's a wonderful addition to the Bond franchise, and it's the fact that we have another 00, and that when you get the fight between them, Sean Bean's going to kill him. He gets distracted by Natalia. It's the same thing, I guess, because they was in as well. And I love the fact he says, James, I was always better. And on top of that, I love when he gets so angry. The whole pen clicking scene, it's when he starts to clock that something like, why is Bond like so calm and focused? And he's trying to work it out. And I love what they do with that he talks about how his Q and he's grabbing the watch. He's not grabbing the pen. It's so well done. It's when he has that burst of anger. And then comes the northern accent to follow it. It's just absolutely perfect. I absolutely love him, and he's right up there with this being serving. A really side point as well that if you look at this film, it feels very much like You Only Live Twice. The whole base at the end, they could have revealed him in the last 20 minutes, and the film would still work without him being in that sort of middle 30 section. But they didn't, and I'm glad they didn't because I'm happy he came out when he didn't. The graveyard scene is just incredible.
I think what people forget a lot about this film as well is that it was a rehabilitation of a brand. And so they needed to go back and revitalize a lot of the staples that we had gotten used to in the previous 16 films. And so they went back and thought, okay, we have to have a villain. Who could theoretically beat Bond? Okay, another 00 agent. Perfect. Because they are just the same amount of training, and he is just as capable of taking him down. And so you have that believability that Bond could be offed by the end of the film. And it's only his sort of vengeance and his anger that really causes him to lose the fight in the end. Because he's going punch for punch in that array battle as they're fighting each other along as they go. And that's what I think lends credibility to Sean Bean's character and why he's so memorable, apart from the fact that he falls and should have died and then gets dropped on and everything blows up, and that's one way to go. But it's the fact that he could have had him again. Much like Xenia, he has Bond on the ropes because he is as good as Bond.
And I like that he's about the same age. A lot of the Bond villains, if they aren't the same age as Bond, which is rare, they might as well be 20 years older. Like they're kind of these dignified scientists or industrialists who feel just a lot older. I like that this guy is physically going toe to toe. I love the moment where Bond hurls him down the ladder or whatever, stairs, and fires the gun as he's rolling down. Moments like that you wouldn't get with I don't know, the villain Drax in Moonraker. it would be the whole audience would just be sympathetic to Drax in that moment. They'd be like, this poor man. But I like that they allow, just because these two actors are physically good matches, you get this amazing toe-to-toe, which you are so often robbed of with your main heavy. You get all that here. But also, the movie's commenting a lot on the darker elements of Bond and how the Pierce Brosnan version leans just enough into the light to be redeemable. Whereas here we get to see the mirror image who's gone fully to the dark side. And we see a lot of the more darker, grotesque elements of Bond really kind of ugly here. We get the scene with him and Natalia where it's
everything. Yeah.
The aggressive kiss raping or whatever, where you're like, oh, this is really uncomfortable. But it's not light years away from some of the stuff we saw maybe Connery do in some of those earlier Bonds, where it was of its time. But you look at that scene in Goldfinger with Pussy Galore, it's pretty uncomfortable. And I like that they're now using that as a way to show, no, this is how this agent has gone. This is a darker dude. This is a guy that's broken, and now we're reframing those sorts of actions in 1990s. So I think they have a lot they can do with this character, and I think they really pull it off. And for me, he is one of my all-time favorite Bond villains, just because of all the physicality and all the thematics they bring to that character. And plus, Sean Bean is just charming as hell. You bring him on screen, he's totally watchable. I'd seen him, before I saw Goldeneye, I'd seen him as the villain in Patriot Games, the Jack Ryan film. And I really liked him in that. And I remember being excited to see him here as the villain. He gets even more to do. He's even more exciting to see on screen. And just what a magnetic performance.
I think the one thing that I think it functions fine in the film, and I think the film plays out fine because of it. It was just the motive of him, like it's just he wants to doom London in like a giant financial crisis with a space laser EMP attack. And my favorite things about the character are the personal connection that he has to Bond, and that he feels betrayed by Bond, and it's. As you mentioned, it's like the polar opposite of Bond. Bond to the extreme where he could go, as you mentioned, if you turn to the dark side. That stuff was like the most fascinating stuff about the character for me. And I liked a little bit more of that when it was just like an EMP attack, it will send London into absolute chaos. I was like, that's your more bog standard Bond villain plot, right? Which works, as we mentioned, like a revitalization of the franchise, going back to similar kind of aspects, the giant space laser. It's fine and it's fun. But I think my more favorite aspects of Sean Bean's character was those more conversation moments that he has with Bond, where you just really see the two dive into that character kind of thing.
Really quickly, that what I love is that Bond's aware of it and is like, so Alex's plan is all about being a little upset kid. Essentially, he gives him that talking down, which is why I think it feels as if they might be aware of it, that it's a very petty plan. I think that's why it works, is because it is essentially, it's more based on the relationship between the two of them. But I do want to add, I love the whole EMP stuff because it feels ahead of its time for the 90s. Maybe I just don't know the history of EMPs. For some reason, I was thinking of the Dark Knight Rises, and that's the first ever time I'd heard of them. But it's just one of them where the actual Goldeneye satellite, I think it's kind of cool. I think it's just cool as you can say a satellite flashing a light could be in the mid-90s.
And there is that scene where they kind of mansplain what an EMP is. It's like electromagnetic pulse was developed, with nuclear fusion, like all that. I'm like, we get it. Maybe 90s audiences didn't, but you're
gonna love the explanations of GPS you have coming up in the future.
Oh, Jesus Christ. It just always reminds me of The Matrix. You've got Neo, who's this, computer whiz kid, like he knows everything. Again, hacking, it was the tail end of the 90s. And then Morpheus says something like, this gave birth to AI. AI? You mean artificial intelligence? It's like, he would know what artificial intelligence, we know what it means. Dialogue like that always drives me wild. Let's talk about the music for this thing. This is probably going to be a big section, actually, because there's I'm going to start with sort of like the main theme song, and then we'll talk about the score afterwards. So the biggest surprise for me, again, the opening credits just do wonders, reading all the names and everything that's coming up. I never knew that the Goldeneye theme was written by Bono, and The Edge, who was, part of the band U2, tied in with Bono. Never knew that at all. And there is actually a demo version of the track that you can hear on YouTube with Bono singing it, which is very clearly a demo. It's not that great, and it's very weird hearing him sing it, especially after being so used to Tina Turner. But it was written specifically with Tina Turner in mind, so there is that to bear in mind with it. The actual Tina Turner track itself, incredible. Very much, as we talked about, going back to basics, the similar kind of things, very Shirley Bassey influenced. You could imagine Shirley Bassey just belting out this song as Tina Turner does. But Tina Turner, one of the best female vocalists of all time, absolutely tremendous, knocks it out of the park. This is probably one of the more sort of like classic Bond songs. It's kind of mysterious and sultry, and it's all those things that a Bond song has to be. And when she's belting out those high notes at the end, it's just incredible. The brass hook to it as well, so good. There was actually a rejected Bond theme for this one as well, and I always like the rejected Bond themes. I always find them fascinating. And again, you can find this on YouTube. There is a version of this. The Swedish band called Ace of Base did a version of the track called Goldeneye, which would eventually, they would rework it and rewrite the lyrics to it, and it would eventually become a song called The Juvenile. When you listen to that song, The Juvenile, replace The Juvenile with Goldeneye, and that's pretty much what the song would have been. But there is a demo version of that track too, which is the proper full Goldeneye one. And I actually kind of like that track. I think that would have worked very well as well. A few of the lyrics are very on the nose, though. Well, I guess you could say the same with Man with the Golden Gun's very much on the nose. But this is a direct lyric. We're in the 90s. Nothing is the same. The Cold War is replaced by different actors using different names. I mean, well, if that doesn't spell out the entire theme of the film, I don't know what does. It's got a very catchy hook to it. I like that version. And they must have had to have fired their recording company after that, because it was the company that said, you probably shouldn't do this, because if the film's a flop, then, it's going to look bad on your career. like, could you imagine turning down a Bond song? That's just absolutely mad to me. And the score. So this is good. I didn't realize this was a point of contention. I thought everyone hated the score for this thing. But Eric Serra, I think, George, you mentioned that he'd done Leon. Was it the year before or a couple of years before? I didn't know what to make of this score going in. I think, George, you kind of prepped me that a lot of people aren't keen on the score. I can absolutely see why that's the case. It was offered to John Barry again, but he turned it down for whatever reason. It's very 90s. Again, it's that kind of industrial sort of like industrial sound, as I just mentioned, sort of like weird ambience and sort of factory sounds and clangs and bangs, and it reminds me of something from Metal Gear Solid. So it does feel very espionage like, but then there's moments where the soundtrack just completely just clashes with the imagery for me. Most notably the car chase scene at the beginning with Xenia. The score to that is just an abomination, and watching the film a second time, it's absolutely dreadful. I'm not defending the score in that. There's some kind of like low ambient moments in the opening scene where they're kind of stalking through corridors with 006, which kind of work. As I mentioned, that's more the Metal Gear Solid kind of sound to it. But yeah, the soundtrack really doesn't work for me in this one. It's not great, but the moments that do are the more orchestral sounding moments. And actually, I thought, is this the same composer? It's like there's these beautiful sweeping string sections at the Baccarat table with Xenia towards the beginning of the film. There's this beautiful melody that comes in that's really genuinely nice. Apparently, Eric Seller was quite hard to work with, especially with the director. And I think it's all down to one key scene, which is the tank scene. Yeah. George, you played me the original version of the track, which is called A Pleasant Drive in St. Petersburg. That would have been, again, an abomination if they'd have played that in that scene. And one of the best moments is when the main Bond theme kicks in that scene. It just completely elevates the scene, and it's just an excellent sequence in general, elevated by the soundtrack. If they'd have gone with that more electronic version, just would not have worked. And apparently John Altman was the one who came in and provided extra music for the film. Serra's stuff is more the synthesized stuff, and then Altman's stuff is the more orchestral. So the Baccarat table music is probably Altman's score and not Serra's. And then really, really quickly, the last song, there's an end credit song as well, continuing the tradition of the two songs. The Experience of Love. This song was an experience. Awful. I hate it. It's a slow fart of a song. That's the only way that I can describe it. It's just absolutely nothing. And that was by Eric Serra as well, who did that song. I think they should have gone with the Ace of Base song for the credits personally out of the two, but I can now have a breath and a drink and pass over to you guys for the music. This was a big section today.
I'm just going to start on the theme quickly because the theme's grown on me over the years. I hate it when I was younger. I like it now. The meat of it for me is Eric Serra. So I love Leon. Honestly, in terms of sort of cult films, that is right up there. It's not in my top 20, but probably sitting in my top 30 or 40. And his score in that is incredible. And it works so well for that film. And it's really creepy that I like to listen to some of the songs outside of it because it's when Gary Oldman's massacring people. The greatest Bond villain we never got to is Gary Oldman. And in the Goldeneye score, I just don't know what it is that you can't listen to it out of isolation. But I've never really listened to the Bond soundtracks out of isolation, bar Casino Royale and Skyfall. I've just never really just gone through them to listen to, which is quite rare for me. But it's one of them where I love and hate it. And I'm so torn because I could shut my eyes and I think I'd be watching a scene from Leon. And the fact it was the year before was probably them saying, we're rebranding, we're rebooting, we're doing new things. Let's try a new score. And the main thing is the tank chase brought in the Bond theme because that is the biggest music moment of the film. And it's clear as daylight because the Bond theme comes into it. And I do sometimes think less is more. Loved Octopussy, but it used every Bond theme and every moment it could. Whereas this one wants to build up to a bit like Casino Royale does. But I like the car chase bit. But I
just don't like the music in the scene.
This is it. It just stands out as being so weird that's why it works for me. That the whole sequence is very odd. The whole, Bond sort of getting on Xenia whilst getting on the person in the investigation, and the weird music works for it personally. And I know that's probably the rarest thing I can have on that scene, but the score itself's a weird one because when you've got those smaller moments, it works really well, especially when you think there's so much tension across the film. But at the same time, it just doesn't work for Bond, and I'm going to be the guy that says it. David Arnold, unfortunately, came 2 years too late. If you'd had David Arnold do a score on this film, I think, I mean, personally, this is right up there anyway. But if David Arnold had done this Bond score, I'm just so intrigued at what could have been, because he had such an impact. And whether he comes back in the future, I really hope so. But Eric Serra, I didn't know it was a point of contention as well. That I saw a lot of people talking about it online, and some people say, I hate the Goldeneye score. I was like, I didn't know people really sort of delved into the Bond scores, and I definitely think it works more in the film than it does listening to it outside of it. But also, it worked very well for the game, and it feels very video gamey as well.
I've got a lot of thoughts about the music on this one, because the Goldeneye track I love. The actual song itself is great. It's actually one of those radio songs like Skyfall that you could hear, and it actually holds up as nothing to do with Bond. It kind of works. I mean, some questionable lyrics in it, like, you'll never know how I watched you from the shadows as a child. iffy choice. And I always get annoyed with the way she sings Goldeneye sometimes, because I'm a big fan of grunge music, and Pearl Jam is my favorite band of all time.
Nice.
And you got like even flow, and then she's like Goldeneye. It's like, is this? Are you trying to channel like Nirvana here? I don't know what you're going for. I always thought that was a weird choice, but I'll blame Bono and The Edge on that one. As for Eric Serra's score, all I have to say is, have you ever heard the version of My Heart Will Go On from Titanic, but played by out of tune flutes?
Shit fluting. Yeah.
Yes, the memes, yeah.
That's exactly what I hear when I hear this movie. It's just like completely out of tune, and my ears just like, like I need to just turn it down somehow. It's god awful, except for the tank scene, which isn't him.
Yeah, I will defend. I like the music during all the industrial scenes, like at the facilities and what have you, like that kind of rumbling, kind of, I don't even know what to call it, atmospheric,
like a pulse,
mostly.
Isn't it? Yeah, atmospheric kind of pulse to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I genuinely like that. I also like the music they play during the escape from the archives, and also during the crashing of the Goldeneye satellite. It's kind of this Russian-themed kind of building ominous music. I think that's very effective. Everything else is garbage. Like, I mean, the classic Bond theme during the tank chase, great. No problems with that. But in terms of the original compositions going on, I'm not a fan of that bling, 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 bling during the car chase. That's brutal. But the experience of love, people. The experience of love. This is like so strange, because it's like, I love the Goldeneye song. I think Tina Turner's, it's probably, it might even be top 3 for me of my all-time favorite Bond songs. It's one I can listen to over and over and over again. I always love it. And the experience of love. Okay, so the next movie you guys are going to be covering, Tomorrow Never Dies, has 2 songs. So it was like, you'll have one up front, and then the one at the end was one that was in consideration for the lead song. Whereas here, I don't think there was ever a moment where they considered the experience of love for the opening song. And it's unbelievable. It's like someone's like Sting cover project. Like, what happens if we try to replicate the music of Sting, but with like no ability to please an audience? It's unbelievable that, like, was this a favor? Was it like he did the score, or maybe when he signed on to do the score, they signed something that allowed him to do the final track? Because otherwise, I don't know what was going on in their heads. Because it's not even like, if we put this song on the end credits, we're going to be able to sell, CDs of it. Like, it's going to make us money. There's no way they thought they'd ever make a cent off this song. So this must have been a favor, right?
I think this was a carryover. I think I read this earlier. It was originally intended to be used in Leon, I think, in like the end credits of Leon. I'm trying to remember that film.
And probably said no to that then. He thought, what to do with it?
This just feels a bit like an ego trip, doesn't it? It's like, I want the end credit song. I want a theme. I want a song of mine in the film somewhere. Like, can I have it in the intro? You're not going to have it in the intro. Fine, it'll be the end credits. And we have the experience of love. I mean, I've saved it on my Bond playlist on Spotify. I have to. I'm a completionist, but I think I'm going to be hitting that skip button every single time that one comes on. Yeah, it's just terrible. Absolutely terrible. I guess other things, like notable things to talk about this very brief thing, is sort of like the product placement of this one. And I mean, I'm not a car guy, but I think they signed a deal for there we go. I don't have a BMW, unfortunately, to bring in, but I know that they signed a deal for that, and you do see the car, I think, don't you, in with the scene with Q, and it's like hooked up with all gadgets. But I think that they got the deal quite late into production, so it feels weird that they kind of tee up the car with all these gadgets, and then it doesn't really get any kind of payoff in the film. I'm wondering, could the scene with the tank have been replaced with a BMW instead, with missiles strapped to it? Probably still would have made for an entertaining scene, but it's Pierce Brosnan as Bond driving a goddamn tank. Like, the tank needs to stay in the film, absolutely. But I'm sure we're going to get like tons more BMWs as the film goes on. But that's probably like the most notable thing. I think we had that discussion on a previous one, or maybe off screen. But like the DB5 is the car for Bond. That is like the classic car for Bond. And there have been many cars throughout the franchise so far. But George, I know you were kind of hung up on the BMW thing. And I guess that is kind of a stereotype. In the UK, at least, the certain demeanor of certain drivers that drive a BMW.
Yeah, my sister's got one, so I joke it to her. Yeah, I mean, we'll get it more in the next couple of films, politely. But it's just so odd for them to do the whole gadget thing, and normally with Q branch is that it's such a great way to. It's like an unofficial thing, right? Whatever you see is going to get a payoff down the line. And it's just so odd that we never got it. And I would never change it for a world. Like, Q can't just, unveil a tank. This is yours, 007. Bring it home. But it's just so odd to have that scene. But the BMW commercial do, I've always just said, it's an experience they learn from it. Because then we get the Aston Martin exclusive deal back in the future. So it's the BMW, it's a weird one. It's just weird they didn't use it. Even if it was as simple as driving over a road like they did with Ford for a couple of films. When they just drive a Ford for 10 seconds because they're obligated to. I'd even mind that, but just to have the whole workshop but nothing is just odd. That being said, does anyone else want to speak about the cars, or shall we talk about Kubi Broccoli?
I will say that we interviewed Jeffrey Kane, who co-wrote Goldeneye, on our podcast. That episode hasn't come out yet. It will be out in the next month but that was one regret he did express, was they didn't do anything with the car. He said, I don't know why we didn't. It feels like a car commercial.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to have seen it, but I mean, if they got the deal like quite late into production, I can understand why, their hands were tied. It's like, we've got this deal, we need to put one in the film, but we've got no space, story-wise for it to appear. But yeah, it does kind of feel like a missed opportunity with that, really. So like the legacy of this film, this can be sort of like, we can wrap up final thoughts in this as well, but it is the last, credit that Kubi Broccoli does have on the film. Obviously he probably wasn't involved in the film as much, but he was a consultant on the film at least. And also the film's dedicated to Derek Meddins as well, who was the special effects supervisor. I think his work on this film was mostly the miniatures, but just for his long serving on the Bond franchise, he was he was dedicated to his memory at the end of the film. So we talked about kind of the last film that we talked about, License to Kill, felt very much like an end to a lot of people who had been long service on the Bond franchise. This is kind of the last one. This is almost like an epilogue to that, it feels like, in many ways. And then when we get to the next one, it's completely new. So yeah, I mean, it's an absolute shame, but I mean, 17 films in, like, Jesus Christ, like he made the franchise what it is, very much like he was the voice on so much of it and what you saw on screen from all subsequent films. So, I mean, it's absolutely sad, but the legacy of him, and now with Barbara Broccoli, it's in very good hands, and she's, as the steward of this franchise that he helped create, I think she's done a wonderful job with it.
Yeah, I think it's the influence of it that the only other comparison I can make to any form of producer that long dedicated to one thing is the MCU at this point in time. That sort of Kubi Broccoli, but also, I don't want to really get to a Marvel versus thing, but Bond surpassed that because of what it did for the industry. That you look at the British industry, that the film industry, certainly that turned it, the developments of Pinewood, even this film, which Rihanna quickly mentioned, this was the first ever film to shoot at Leavesden. It was the Rolls-Royce factory before, and now it's the Harry Potter studio tour that a lot of big films came after, but this was the first to use it. So his influence, not just on the franchise but the British film industry, is almost unparalleled, especially at sort of the strides forward with it. So the fact there's something so charming that Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson stayed on, that I'd imagine a lot of producers in similar situations might have tried. I mean, George Lucas is one, right? he didn't keep it in the family. He wanted it in safe hands at Disney. I think he's got that. He wanted it to go to them. And I think that's very much what Cubby Broccoli's done. And sort of Barbara growing up on the films, working on them to where she's now, I think we're in safe hands as well for the future, even with Amazon breathing down their necks.
I think it's kind of hard to sort of talk about Cubby's influence on this film because I feel like he hasn't influenced the film. I think it really stands on its own and is the first Bond to really stand on its own. Even the Daltons really are in that shadow. But it definitely still pays homage to what came before, I would say. And even the Brosnan character himself, in some ways, is an amalgam of everything that's come before, which he shaped. So I think that's his epitaph, is basically the Brosnan Bond.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Cubby Broccoli, he did something that I think is very special, especially even more so I appreciate nowadays, which is that he was a creative producer, whereas now most of these producers overseeing projects are typically money guys, and not so much with Marvel. Kevin Feige is a very creative producer as well, but a lot of the case, it's kind of like the overlords who hold the money who kind of make these things happen. Whereas like Cubby Broccoli was a guy who came in there, and when he was with Harry Saltzman as well, they had a very specific creative approach to this franchise that's often weird. Like one of the things I admire about the Bond franchise is how just unapologetically weird it can be at times, because it's people just like filtering their sensibilities into these movies. And you kind of lose that in the world of these Disney produced things and what have you. It's, a room of people basically writing out the idiosyncratic sort of elements of the storytelling. And Cubby had that. And I've read many of the Bond books. I love them. The Ian Fleming approach to Bond is very unique and interesting. It's not what the movie version is. Like what Cubby Broccoli brought was this entire new approach to how to tell Bond stories, who the cinematic Bond is. And I look at Goldeneye as like the baton pass. All of the lessons he learned over many decades of telling these stories, he passed on, and Barbara is looking at what her father built and reframing it for the future. Like when the book is written on, Barbara's run on the series, you're going to look at Goldeneye until whatever film that is, and you're going to have a very clear picture of how these films began and where they went, and you're going to compare that to the Cubby Broccoli and see how it's kind of this line, but you see how she's brought interesting elements onto it herself. So to me, I wish we had more creative producers like this running franchises, honestly. They make them more interesting to me than a lot of what we get now. But that to me is the Cubby Broccoli thing. Goldeneye was it's a home run because of what he built and the lessons he imparted onto his daughter, who then she, took it on for her own.
And I think you get that with sort of like a lot of, like the family kind of lineage of producers or whatever it happens to be. You have it with authors, like Tolkien and his son that would then carry on the mantle, things like that. If it's kept in the family, there's always that inherent respect for it, where I agree, like a lot of producers and things now, it's all very sort of focus grouped and very corporate. And not to, producing is inherently a corporate thing. And I'm not, Cubby Broccoli probably had his fair share with that, obviously, but it felt like he had a true vision with it and passion, and just to see how it evolved and developed under his kind of, guidance as well was just absolutely tremendous. And as I mentioned, I think, his daughter's doing a fantastic job with it so far as well. Looking forward to seeing what she does for like the next incarnation as well. Let's talk about some of our favorite scenes. We've probably mentioned a few already. We're almost getting onto the one-liners, and I'm not going to read all of them out because that's ridiculous. But favorite scenes, I'm trying to think if there's a scene that we haven't really talked about, but I think we've pretty much covered everything. For me, talked about the opening scene. I will say the stunt, and I thought they were actually going to do it for a second. When the plane goes over the cliff and then he chases it over on the motorbike, I thought, is there a way they could do this in camera where they have like a stunt guy who actually makes it into the plane in shot? And they don't. And then there's like a kind of rear projection thing. And I was like, oh, it's such a missed opportunity there, especially when you had like the great bungee jump scene. But even so, I still think that's quite an iconic opener. So I've got to say the bungee jump scene, just from, its importance. The tank chase is just incredibly well filmed, well shot. There's certain scenes you watch in films where you just think, I have no idea how they did that, and like got everything together for that, and the locations and everything. That scene's one of them. And then I'm going to cheat and pretty much say every single scene that Xenia's in is probably one of my favorite scenes too. I guess I don't do it for my favorite scenes, which basically, when you boil all that down, is just the entire film, really, isn't it? Let's be fair.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in anyway. I don't think there is a bad scene in the film. Scanning it through my bar the beach scene.
The beach scene.
Hmm.
Beach scene's pretty bad.
So it's one of them where it's just full of iconography. This film, and it's easy now, but I would have been. It would have been incredible to have been there at the time. I think when we speak about over the last few years, it's been a channel. I remember I think when we covered Fury Road, that's one of our first ever videos. We knew that was an instant classic, and that is showing it across time. That is very much a film that is going to be spoken about for decades. And I think certainly with Bond, Goldeneye has had that, and I just can't fault it. Even if it's something as little as just as we said, him chatting about how good. It's a phenomenal scene, or him having a fight in a spa. Who'd have ever thought a fight in a spa would be so good at such random notice? So it's really hard to pick a favorite. Personally, I'm just going to go with the tank chase because that reeks James Bond. The way Brosnan is driving, and I think the behind the scenes is saying that I think they had to like drill into the tank for them to get him in it, and they did something with it. I don't know if he was actually driving it, but they had to basically almost redesign a tank so someone could drive it whilst Brosnan could look like he's driving it. And it's just incredible reading about it. But I think that's the epitome of it, that we had a real tank in the streets. It's not CGI. That's the thing. And I think if they did that today, I always have that question, would they CGI it? Would they not? Bond, I think they would do that really again if they ever could. But you never know with films these days. And I think that stood the test of time. And when you look at James Bond as an overall, even after the street scene, the way it just slowly crawls out on the train track as well, like ready, it's so well done. So I'm just gonna flow out the entire film for me.
I think I agree. There's such a solid film that it's hard to pick out things that stand above the rest because everything is just so solid. So I think what I'll take this opportunity is to point out some really good Brosnan moments. And firstly, it's in that tank scene where he just for a second adjusts his tie. It's a simple little thing, but it's just instantly you'll remember that. It's such a cool moment. It's a gifable moment, and it gets replayed all the time. There's a couple more that are lesser known, and I've been pointing out them recently. The first one is when he's going through the boat, and he beats the guy up, throws him downstairs, and just wipes his face with a towel, and then continues. It's just a cool little element. And then the last one is when he's escaping the little prison cell in Russia to get to the tank. I think or maybe he's in the base at the end. I can't remember where it is, but he's being shot at and he's just reloading a gun. And then the bullet ricochets off the wall next to him. He just goes, he's just doing the gun. Doesn't even pay any mind. He's not paying any attention. He's just so cool. He's just like, oh, whatever. I'm going to play with my gun for a bit.
It's like the Han Solo special edition with Greedo, isn't it? Just like the head to the side thing.
Don't remind me of that moment. Look, it's tough to kind of point out favorite scenes because we've already talked them to death. When you have the whole takedown of the satellite, obviously the opening with the bungee. But I made a couple of notes of just moments I want to just touch back on. One was we talked about it, but the Boris Penn moment I think is one of the best Hitchcockian moments in the whole movie because you have the whole clicking of the pen, and you, the viewer, are starting to count the clicks to try to determine when the bomb could go off. And that's the thing with suspense, as Hitchcock said. If a bomb just goes off and no one knows about it, that's surprise. But if you know the bomb's going to go off and you don't know when, that's suspense. So this is a great example of that. Also, I thought the sequence on the train where they're trying to escape and Bond is laser watching the door, and basically we're counting down to when it's going to, the computer's going to ping on exactly where the satellite is or the antenna is. That is so effective. It's just pure movie making because there's no explosion that's going to blow up these actors. And yet we are completely you got to get out, you got to get out, you got to get out. Like it's completely working. And that goes to the editing as well as Martin Campbell's direction. I think he does a fantastic job there. Another moment that people don't really bring up, but I really like, which is that after the plane crashes in the jungle and Bond blacks out and he comes to, and it's this kind of dreamy white lighting. And you just hear this chopper overhead and you can, he's very discombobulated and doesn't really know what's going on. And then you see Xenia, rappel down in the middle of that and take him down. I always really like that moment. I think that's really effective and feels like kind of a strange choice in terms of how to portray that moment that you wouldn't get in probably any of the preceding Bond films.
Yeah, I didn't even remember that moment, but it's like, oh god, is Bond having Vietnam flashbacks again? Like, what's going on here? Like, but
I think Jack Wade might have, because he
Yeah,
references
probably.
Nam at a certain point.
I'm glad you mentioned the scene with like where she's trying to pinpoint where Boris's location is as well, because that is such a trope in spy films, though, isn't it? The ticking clock. And honestly, like, especially, I'm going to go back to Mission Impossible again. There's one at the end of Mission Impossible Fallout. Done well, there is always a place for a ticking clock at the end of a film, and it is down to the editing, it's down to the music, the pacing, and the urgency of it. But if a film can do it, it can still grab your attention and can still give you that feeling of suspense as well. Nikolai's commented as well. My favorite scene is actually Natalia escaping. And then he also mentions about St. Petersburg is absolutely gorgeous city. Visit it if you can. Yeah, I think they recreated it, didn't they, in the studio as well for that chase scene, and like when it's careering through buildings. As I mentioned, I've no idea how they would have even. I think it took them 6 weeks to film that scene. Actually, the tank chase, absolutely mad stuff. Let's get on to the one-liners. I'm not going to read them all out. I'm going to try and pick some of my favorite ones. Not really a one-liner, but I kind of picked up on this one more on a second viewing, and I just really enjoyed it. It's in the opening scene. It's when Bond's getting like the bomb ready, the 6-minute timer, and he's like, "Shut the door, Alec. There's a draft." I quite like that line. I don't know.
I like your impression. That's good.
Oh God, what else do we have? I always love a woman who pulls rank. That's a good one. So Xenia gets one, and I've written it down, but it's more confusing because it feels like a one-liner, but it just makes no sense to me as a one-liner. She reports back to Oromov and says, "I had to ventilate someone." Like, it's where she, when she looks up and like she's escaped in the vent at the top. It's such a weird one-liner. I put the writings on the wall down here, but I put that for more of the omen of dread by the time we get through to Spectre.
I actually really like that one because Q actually cracks up at that one.
Yeah.
That's cool. I like, you don't get a lot of that in the franchise where Q is actually amused at Bond's quips. I like that one.
And a lot of people have mentioned that as well, the dynamic with Desmond Llewellyn and Pierce Brosnan, which, we're starting to see in this one, but I'm looking forward to seeing those two work off each other more in the next few films. Did you check her out head to toe? That got a good laugh out of me. Famke Jensen's one-liner of it's the tank scene with the train, and it's just the look of pure just ecstasy on her face where she's like, "He's going to derail us," and she's like getting turned on about it. So good. But I think my favorite one overall, "You don't need the gun, Mr. Bond. That depends on your definition of safe sex," and that will close me out. That's probably my favorite one-liner in the film. But there's a few. There's probably hundreds in the film, in all honesty.
Yeah, the first hour of Brosnan just feels like one-liners just being like flashed at you like at a club or something. That it's just quite incredible. But I've got two I want to really quickly mention. One of them is his first line, and it just always makes me smile. It's the "Beg your pardon, forgot to knock," and it's just, do people imagine James Bond coming down a toilet once in their life? Because it's just amazing. It's the smile, it's the build-up to it, and I think that's the first time we actually see him as well. So obviously we know it's a stunt double at the start, but that's one. But the best one in the film for me, the one I always go back to, and I think this is actually Q's best line from the entire franchise, is "Don't touch that. Pause. That's my lunch." What a great way! And this is it. This is what I love. It's the way Brosnan's just like flapping the sort of subway around as well. That it's just. It's like the comedy timing of it, and I love Desmond Llewellyn. And when we get him in the Brosnan era for those last couple of films, we spoke about License to Kill, that he was on the mission with him, he was so active, but he does feel like that sort of that great uncle in this film. And you can tell that him and Brosnan just have this respect for one another, and I love it when they're on screen together. He just seems to be so happy being at the facilities as well, getting this new tech. So yeah, absolutely love it.
I had two lined up, and they're both Bond talking about Xenia. So the first one, not my absolute favorite, but it's when he's in the sauna and he goes, no more foreplay. Yeah. It's like, yeah, okay. But my favorite is actually like when she dies, and he just comes out with, "She always did enjoy a good squeeze." And it's just like, yes. This is the puns that you have to get ready for when you got the future Brosnans coming.
Oh, I'm ready. I'm ready.
This is exactly the kind of pun you have coming in your future.
Yeah, for me, the no more foreplay one is my favorite because of the way it's probably partly because of the way they used it in the trailers, where they would play that, and then as soon as he said that no more foreplay, the music kicked in, the Bond theme.
Nice.
And so, like, I'd seen that trailer many times before I went and saw the movie, and I was like, incredible. I think the Boys with Toys line that Natalia has is actually pretty good, and actually sums up the Bond character and the Trevelyan character very well.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh god, there's so many from this one. I hope there's more in the well, probably equally, if not on par, in the next one. Scott's nodding, so I'm definitely looking forward to that one. Let's go into sort of final thoughts on this one. So for me, there was quite a lot of pressure me going into this one, because obviously it was my first time seeing it, but just knowing the love and the reputation that this film had, even just in the lead up to this film, you know, you guys and, you know, all the other people that we've had on the channel as well, really hyping up Goldeneye. I thought, oh god, what if there's so much hype. Usually if something's ridiculously hyped up and you go, it's never going to meet that level. Thankfully, I can say that it absolutely did. I think this is a very entertaining Bond film. I can see why it has the love that it had and the impact that it had on people. It's very much that back to basics film, as we mentioned, but at the same time revitalizing it for the 90s, which is exactly what it needed to do. It's a very tough sell to do that, to sort of, you know, keep the older fans and what they can expect, keep all the ingredients of that, but still kind of push it and propel it in a new direction. I think the film did exactly what it needed to do. I think it's a very good introduction for Pierce Brosnan's Bond, and I'm looking forward to seeing him develop the character more and see what he brings in the next 3 films. And yeah, just great array of villains. The soundtrack does let it down, but I think the film itself and the action, the stunts and the story is good enough to keep it elevated. If the soundtrack had been better, it would have been an absolute home run. It would have been 10 out of 10 for me, but that does kind of hold it back ever so slightly. But the film, the acting, the characters, everything's just firing on all cylinders for this one. So absolutely, I think this is a top tier Bond film.
Yeah, this is right up there. You know, you've got, you know, the good films, the fun films, they're maybe not great, but you have the elite tier of Bond films. There's probably 7 or 8 of them total. And this sits right at the top. If not, it's surely going to be in most people's top 3s. And I just don't think you can look past Brosnan. You can look past the villains. Everything you want from a James Bond film, this delivers on and more. You've got a great Bond girl. You've got great gadgets. You've got great tech. You've got a chase scene. You've got action scenes. You've got villains. I don't know how anyone can go into this film and think this isn't what I was expecting from a James Bond film. This is the quintessential Bond film, ready for a new generation. One thing I didn't mention at the start, that for a lot of people, that 6-year gap, you know, they might have even seen License to Kill being so young, being rated 15. And I think so many people I speak to, this was either their first Bond film or at least at the cinema. And it feels very generational, and it's easy to hold up things like this in nostalgia. But you can take any nostalgia out of this and it stands by itself. There's a reason it has the reputation it does. And I think it delivers on that. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, if there's any Bond film to watch outside of wanting to do them all or go for an actor, this one is the one I will always throw on to be standalone, with maybe 1 or 2 others.
Whenever I'm talking about genre films and franchise films, whenever I get to one that's clearly better than the rest or better than most, I try and look at it from a sense of, if you took the franchise stuff away, like if you took the Bond name away, would it work as a film? And this does. Like, if he's just a spy, you don't have all the baggage of being Bond. Is it still a fantastic film? The answer is yes. It's got everything there: good villains, good story, good action, and, you know, good lead in Pierce Brosnan. So on that sense, it works as a fantastic film, let alone a fantastic Bond film. And also, just to say what you said, George, like, this is a seminal movie in Bond history. It brought so many people into this fold. I think I can say hand on heart, this is the reason I'm talking to you now, is this film. It brought me in. I mean, it was a video game first, but it was based on this film. And then I went back and watched the film. And I think there's a lot of people around our age that will say exactly the same thing. And I don't know if Casino Royale had exactly the same effect. And I don't think there's many other ones that you would say did the same. I think this is probably the one that really brought the biggest generation of new Bond fans in after the original sort of Sean Connery lot in the 60s.
Yeah, I agree. This one is one of the milestone Bonds, I think, in its impact on the franchise. And time has been very kind to it, because you can look at some that were massive hits. Like Moonraker is a massive hit, I mean, I guess it was referenced in Black Widow, so it has a legacy, but it doesn't necessarily hold up to scrutiny when you're looking at it, as a film or as a story being told on the screen. Whereas like Goldeneye is one that I remember at the time when it came out, reviews were like they weren't over the moon. There was a lot of, Siskel and Ebert, 1 thumb up, 1 thumb down kind of stuff, or C+, B grades kind of thing. And it's one that I think has become, people have done a real turnaround on it and recognized its importance. And I don't know how much of the impact is honestly the video game. I think it made a lot of this movie incredibly iconic, even beyond what maybe the film was achieving. The game was such a touchstone for an entire generation. But because of that game, I think a lot of people went back and watched the movie over and over and over again. And so it has attained this legacy that no other Bond movie really has, just in pure pop culture saturation. I mean, Goldfinger would have back in the 60s as well, but it doesn't have that kind of that cross-media appeal that Goldeneye has. And it's one that, even though it has a sort of elevated status, I think it's earned it and it supports it. It's not one where you go back and go like, well, I can see why it was popular, but boy, it's got a lot of problems. It kind of does all the elements exceedingly well. All of the villains, all the locations, maybe not the car, maybe not the Eric Serra final song at the end, but other than that, it's really hitting home runs time and time again. And is it by the Bond numbers? Maybe, but it's doing it better than the majority of the other films to try to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pure entertainment. And, for a Bond film, that's all you want most of the time. And it absolutely did that, did exactly what it set out to do. And so that was all of our thoughts on GoldenEye, but we want to hear from you guys now. And obviously we have had some people commenting tonight. If you're just discovering this video now, after we've gone live, let us know what you think of GoldenEye. Is it nostalgic to you? Did you grow up with it? Did you play the video game? Thoughts on the film, everything in between, or just about James Bond, please do be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. We will be back next week, Tuesday the 17th, for Tomorrow Never Dies. Now, I'm going to say, Tomorrow Never Dies and World Is Not Enough, I know absolutely zero about. Nothing at all, nothing in the slightest. At least with this one, I knew about Sean Bean and the bungee jump. Those ones are just going to be a complete, just clear slate for me. And it's going to be nice getting back into watching Bond films as well. I know that, it's been like a week and a half, hasn't it? 2 weeks since we went to see GoldenEye. So I've been waiting to do this review before watching the next one. I didn't want to get ahead of myself, but it's going to be nice to get back into the swing of things and start watching them week to week now. And once again, guys, thanks for jumping on with us tonight, taking on probably one of the most memorable Bond films, I would say. GoldenEye, definitely the one that's hyped up the lot. And obviously it was your guys' first review as well. So as you can see on the bottom of the screen, that's where you can find the SpyHards podcast. You've already talked about some of the videos you've got coming up, but if you just want to sort of reaffirm where people can find you and what they can expect in the next couple of weeks.
Well, as we said, this week is our anniversary of doing GoldenEye 1 year ago, and we're celebrating with 1998's The Avengers with Ralph Fiennes, as we were talking about earlier, and we've got some extra interviews in there as well, as we said. Next week, funnily enough, we're actually going back to Brosnan, and we're just sort of wrapping up all 4 Brosnan films in sort of a roundtable approach. We've got a bunch of guests coming on, including Tom from James Bond A to Z, who's been on this channel as well. He's a great guest, and it's going to be a long episode, but we've got a lot of different interviews. And then we also have an interview with our first Bond girl coming next week as well.
Ooh. Awesome. Well, I'm definitely going to be watching that video on the roundtable discussion. Once I've watched all of Brosnan's ones, I will go back to that one and make sure I watch it. Don't want to spoil anything too much. But yeah, as I said, thank you again for coming on for this one. 2 weeks on the trot. It's been absolutely tremendous. So thank you for jumping on for GoldenEye. I think, are they all the announcements we have, George? Do we have anything else?
I think so. We're on a quiet week at the moment. We had a busy one. There's a review for Marvel's What If on the channel now that popped up over the weekend. We've had a few of the films out. There's a few films upcoming. Unfortunately, no Green Knight, as we keep saying. But I think People That Just Do Nothing's coming out next week. And there might be a surprise review on the channel because I'll be at the Cineworld surprise screening tomorrow. So I'm hoping it's really not a surprise, not one of the two that everyone else has predicted. So there's a couple of things, as we always say, but the main thing at the moment is Bond. And I'm not going to try and keep us on longer, but I do want to give some news I've seen on Twitter. It's like that Sin Cara, who are the VIP company that get people into events, have listed on their website that the Bond premiere will be on Tuesday, the 20th of September at the Royal Albert Hall. And if this is true, and they've confirmed the premiere, then as far as I'm concerned, no need to worry about delays in England. Sorry, Cam, we don't know what's happening in North America. Yes, so if that is true, don't hold me to it. But the Sin Cara Group, who are the VIP company, we might know more details next couple of weeks. Who knows?
Awesome. Right, so that will do it for us, guys. 2.5, just cleared 2.5 hours. We tried to keep this as brief as possible. We knew it was going to be a long one. Thank you to everyone who's been watching, comment along, and we'll see you guys next week. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.